Chapter 1. The year I graduated college, I was deceived into Myanmar. Don't go to Myanmar. Don't go to Myanmar. Don't go to Myanmar. No matter the reason, never, ever go to Myanmar in this life. That's my advice to everyone. This book is based on true events. Many people around me know that I used to spend a few years in Yunnan, but very few know that I was actually tricked into going to Myanmar. My name is Lee Chong. I was deceived into going to Myanmar in 2012. I struggled in that living hell for several years before finally escaping by the skin of my teeth. Even though it's been a long time, the days I was trapped in Myanmar are still vivid in my mind. I remember it clearly. It was the summer 11 years ago, and I had just graduated from university. I'd been rebellious and headstrong since I was a child. I always thought I was exceptional and that I would succeed at everything I did. So, instead of looking for a job after graduating, I decided to start my own business. Starting a business required money, so I asked my parents for 50,000 yuan as seed money, but my dad gave me a fierce scolding on the phone. Furious, I took the last 1,000 yuan my parents had given me for living expenses and bought a train ticket to Dali, Yunnan. Partly, I wanted to travel and clear my head, and partly I wanted to see if there were any good opportunities. My head was full of thoughts of how to make a fortune on my own and throw it in my dad's face, proving to him that his son was born to be great. It was this trip to Yunnan that made me truly understand what it felt like to live in hell in the days that followed. Within a week of arriving in Yunnan, I had spent all my money. I had no choice but to find temporary work as a bartender, which included room and board. During my 2 weeks working at the bar, I saw all kinds of wealthy people spending money like water. The attractive and glamorous singers who performed would even proactively accompany those men while they drank, and even the bar owner, whom I considered a goddess, would greet them with bright smiles. Each time I saw this, I would tell myself again and again that I would become rich one day, that I wouldn't end up like my parents, stuck in our small hometown, running a dingy little grocery store for decades. As the desire to make big money grew stronger, I quickly became dissatisfied with the status quo. I started looking for high-paying jobs online. I sent out 7 or 8 resumes, and soon 3 companies contacted me. After all, I was a legitimate college graduate, and finding a job wasn't too difficult in those days. Looking back now at my arrogance back then, I feel like slapping myself in the face. After rejecting 2 jobs that paid 2,000 to 3,000 yuan a month, I chose the last company that contacted me, a media company. The HR manager, with a sweet voice, talked to me on the phone for half an hour and promised me a high salary of 8,000 yuan a month, with regular 9 to 5 hours, weekends off, company team-building activities, and even international trips. I didn't even consider the fact that I was a complete newbie, fresh out of college with no work experience, so why would anyone offer me such a high salary and great benefits? The day after finalizing the job, I left Dali and boarded a bus to Xishuangbanna. After arriving in Xishuangbanna, the onboarding process was smooth, and the company seemed very legitimate. The employee dormitory was even a single suite. I thought this company was going to be the starting point for my success in life, but it turned out to be the entrance to hell. After starting work, I discovered that the company was even better than I had imagined. On my very first day, the company organized a lively welcome dinner. Dozens of young people from all over the country drank beer, ate skewers, talked about their youth, and dreamed of the future. In that kind of atmosphere, I quickly integrated completely. The only thing that made me feel a little uneasy was how relaxed the work was. It was so laid back that I felt a twinge of guilt about receiving 8,000 yuan a month. I also suspected that such a relaxed job might lead to salary delays. But it turns out I was overthinking it. On the 15th of the second month, my salary arrived in my account on time. Not only that, but the company also announced that their departments in Sichuan province and some other coastal provinces had performed exceptionally well last month, exceeding their targets, and the group's headquarters had decided to reward all employees with an overseas trip. Our Xishuangbanna branch was essentially riding the coattails of other departments, and we were also given a chance to go on an international trip. The company had already organized 3 group dinners in the past month or so. With this company-wide overseas trip being organized, no one, including me, suspected anything was amiss. It was only after being tricked into Myanmar that I realized that I had fallen into an elaborate scheme from the day I joined the company. The destination for the overseas trip was Thailand. The thought of getting up close and personal with the legendary ladyboys made me excited the night before departure. Looking back, I was such an idiot. The company moved quickly, buying everyone plane tickets for that evening. At that time, online fraud was only just beginning, and Myanmar hadn't become synonymous with it yet. No one paid any attention to the fact that our plane tickets took us to Myanmar first before heading to Thailand. As soon as we left the airport in Myanmar, our group followed the two company leaders onto a bus. It was late at night in a foreign country, and no one knew where the bus was going. The road became more and more bumpy and uneven. I asked Zhang Fengfeng, the HR manager who had hired me, and she said that there had been a problem with the flight to Thailand that night, so we were taking a shortcut by bus since it was close. I knew that Thailand, Myanmar, and Laos were bordering countries, so I didn't ask any further questions. The trip was tiring, and since the road was bumpy and there was no scenery to see at night, I soon fell asleep. When I woke up again, the bus was parked in a dilapidated place that looked like an industrial park. There's been a landslide ahead. Everyone get off the bus. We'll rest here for the night, Zhang Fengfeng said with a smile, as she began directing everyone off the bus. Many times later, I would wake up in my dreams startled by that smile of Zhang Fengfeng's that night. As soon as we had all gotten off the bus, several powerful searchlights suddenly turned on, and a dozen or so dark-skinned Myanmar men rushed out of a small building. They were all carrying guns and quickly surrounded us. Chapter 2. Caged like dogs, treated worse than animals. Dozens of Myanmar men with guns suddenly appearing in the middle of the night, and surrounding us was something none of us had ever seen before. Everyone was terrified. Several of the women screamed in terror. Welcome to Myanmar. Welcome to paradise. The HR manager, Zhang Fengfeng, now had a playful expression on her face, smiling even more brightly. The Myanmar men surrounding us with guns also laughed boisterously. Their ferocious faces were like demons from hell. First, collect all their belongings. Handle it the usual way, Zhang Fengfeng instructed with a gesture before turning and walking into a low building. The Myanmar men rushed forward, kicking and punching us and shouting in broken Chinese. Someone instinctively tried to resist, only to be hit on the head with a gun stock and fall to the ground, face covered in blood. The man from northeast China who had been knocked down tried to get up, but a hideous-looking Myanmar man picked up an iron rod and smashed it down on his leg. The next moment, everyone heard the man's heart-wrenching scream. I knew his leg had been broken. The viciousness of these Myanmar men made my scalp tingle, and the hair on my body stood on end. Anyone who dares to disobey will be skinned alive, the Myanmar man who had broken the man's leg shouted, brandishing a knife, frightening many of us into trembling. Everyone had seen the man's leg broken in front of them, so no one doubted that they were being serious. I was completely stunned, with only one thought in my mind. My life was over. After our phones and other belongings were taken, under the ruthless direction of the Myanmar men, we were all separated and put into iron cages. My cage was less than a meter in width, length, and height. I couldn't stand up straight and I couldn't lie down. I could only huddle in the cage like a dog. At that moment, as I was curled up in the cage, I clenched my fists and my heart was filled with remorse and longing for my parents back home. If only I had listened to my father and found a steady job after graduating, I wouldn't have ended up in this mess. I hated Zhang Fengfeng for tricking me into coming to Myanmar. But in truth, I hated myself even more. I hated myself for being so naive, for believing in things that sounded too good to be true, and for thinking that I was so great when I had no real skills. I bit my lip to keep myself from crying. After a while of jumbled thoughts, I only had one thought in mind. I had to find a way to escape. Before I could even think of a plan, a rush of cold water hit me, making me shiver uncontrollably. It turned out, being locked in a dog cage was just the beginning. After everyone had been locked up, the Myanmar men started to laugh maniacally as they used high-pressure water hoses to soak us. Even though it was already August, the temperatures in the Myanmar mountains at night were only in the low teens. The cold water from the high-pressure hoses made many of us shiver uncontrollably. The Myanmar men laughed as they hosed us, as if they saw us as nothing more than a group of animals. They kept the high-pressure hoses on us for 5 or 6 minutes before finally stopping. I was curled up in my dog cage, hugging my knees and shivering. My clothes were soaked through, and even my underwear was dripping. I thought being locked in a dog cage and being sprayed with high-pressure water was the most humiliating experience of my life. But what happened next showed me what true humiliation was. 2 Myanmar men with batons came and opened my cage, ordering me to crawl out. To be honest, at that moment, I actually preferred to stay locked in the cage. I instinctively felt that it might be safer inside. As soon as I hesitated, one of the men struck me hard on the back with a baton, and the pain nearly made me cry out. "Get out of here now!" the Myanmar man yelled, hitting me in the back with his baton as he screamed at me. The pain made me scream as I crawled out of the cage on my hands and knees. At that moment, I truly felt like I was less than a dog. After all, no owner would treat their dog this cruelly. "Take your clothes off," one of the Myanmar men, who barely reached my chin, ordered once I was out of the cage. Huh. I didn't understand at first, wondering if I had misheard, as their Chinese was very broken. Immediately, a hard slap hit me across the face, making my face go numb and my head buzz. I said, "Take your clothes off. Take them all off." After slapping me, the Myanmar man started hitting me all over with his baton. These thugs didn't treat us like human beings at all. They were hitting us like they wanted to kill us. After just a few blows, I felt like I couldn't take it anymore. If I let these thugs keep hitting me, I might end up being beaten to death tonight. Okay, I'll take them off. I instinctively protected my head as I quickly agreed, as the pain was too much to bear. Worthless scum. After hitting me a couple more times, the man spat a glob of phlegm on my face and stopped hitting me. I looked around at my companions trapped in their cages. Everyone was huddled up watching me, but no one said a word. In order to find an opportunity to escape, and more importantly, in order not to be beaten to death tonight, I quickly stripped naked as I was stared at by dozens of men and women. I even took my underwear off. Privacy and shame were worthless in the face of death. I knew that my moral bottom line was rapidly plummeting. Was taking off my clothes all there was to it? No, it was far from over. The next thing I knew, I was hung upside down by my feet, completely naked. Two men who looked like doctors proceeded to examine me from head to toe, inside and out. They drew a large bag of my blood, at least 500 milliliters. Not only did they open my mouth to check my teeth and mouth like they were examining livestock, but these two doctor-like Myanmar thugs also measured my size. The most perplexing thing was they even stuck something like a bamboo stick up my rear end. I have no idea what they were looking for, but it burned and I almost passed out right there. Later, I learned that not everyone got the anal and genital inspection treatment. It was only given to those who were healthy, strong, and good-looking. Those who looked ugly or had weak and unhealthy bodies didn't receive this special treatment. It was because of my own physical condition that I was later able to find an opportunity to escape this hellhole. But what I went through to grasp that chance at survival is something I still don't want to remember to this day. Those tragic memories buried deep in my heart have woken me up from nightmares countless nights. Chapter 3. Thank goodness I'm not a woman. I wasn't the only one who was stripped naked, had blood drawn, and went through a physical. Everyone else suffered the same fate. After I was humiliated and went through the blood drawing and physical, I was put back into the dog cage. This time, I was put back in there completely naked. Huddled up in that cage that was less than a square meter, I curled up tighter and couldn't stop my body from shaking with the cold. Second, third, fourth. The men were taken out of their cages, one by one, either grabbed or dragged out like cattle, and after they were given their brutal blood draw and physical, it was the women's turn. That's right, the women were not spared the humiliation of being publicly violated. I had dated in college and slept with my girlfriend, but I never imagined that I would see a woman's body in this way. No woman wanted to be publicly humiliated in this way. Those who tried to resist were met with the Myanmar thugs jumping on them, excited, and subjecting them to all kinds of abuses. Of course, this involved groping and pawing at them. Hearing the women's screams and seeing them tied by their limbs, hanging upside down, with their bodies on full display with no dignity, in that moment, I was glad that I was a man. For women of average build and appearance, that night was especially miserable. With these women, the Myanmar thugs acted completely unrestrained. There were a couple of young girls with good looks and figures who, while they were still hung up and had blood drawn, the Myanmar thugs were noticeably more restrained with them. I later found out that young girls who were attractive and had good figures had a higher value. Sometime later, I accidentally found out that one of the women in our group, named Wu Xinger, because she was a virgin, had her first night sold for 88,000 yuan. These Myanmar thugs would do everything possible to maximize the value they could squeeze out of us pigs. That's right, pig, is what we were all called in Myanmar. After torturing us all until the late hours of the night, after everyone had been examined, we were put back into our cages. The Myanmar thugs went back to sleep, yawning. Everyone who was beaten, frightened, and even urinated on themselves waited until the surrounding area was completely quiet before they dared to start talking to each other in low voices, with crying in their voices, from their cages. Some sobbed and said they missed their parents and wanted to go home. Others were cursing the Myanmar thugs. And others said that they wanted to escape this hellhole and kill that group of thugs. I had been hit hard with batons earlier, and my body was aching all over. I was lethargically curled up in my cage, and I didn't say a word the entire time. Escaping? Killing those thugs? How is that even possible? I couldn't help but bitterly smile to myself as I listened to them whispering and plotting from behind their cages. Zhang Fengfeng and the others had spent so much effort and time on this that there was no way that they would let us escape so easily. I had already had a chance to observe our surroundings with the help of the searchlights and dim moonlight. We were in a large mountain area. This hellhole that looked like an industrial park was at least several hundred acres in size and was completely surrounded by 3-meter-high walls. The top of the walls was also covered with barbed wire. It was very possible that the barbed wire was also electrified. This place was more like a prison or even a concentration camp from World War II. Escaping from here would be harder than reaching heaven. I wanted to escape more than anyone else, but I also knew that the most important thing right now wasn't thinking of how to escape. It was about figuring out how to stay alive. Only if you are alive can you think about the other stuff. At some point, curled up, I dozed off. When I opened my eyes, it was already the next morning. The sun was shining, and it was very comfortable. Listening to the sounds of the insects and birds in the surrounding forests, I really wished that everything that had happened last night was just a nightmare. But then I saw 2 Myanmar men carrying a bucket towards us, as well as the Myanmar thugs standing guard with guns, and I knew that it wasn't a dream. I had, in fact, been tricked into going to Myanmar. I had been tricked into hell on earth. Time for food. A short, fat Myanmar man wearing an apron and holding a large metal spoon hit the cages to wake up everyone who was still asleep. 2 Myanmar thugs opened 5 of the dog cages, including mine, and used their batons to drive us out. After being curled up in a dog cage all night, my whole body felt uncomfortable. I tried to move my body and, with some effort, I finally managed to crawl out of the cage like a dog and staggered to the side of the bucket containing the food. As soon as I looked at it, my eyebrows furrowed. If the stuff in that bucket could be called food, then the food in our university cafeteria was gourmet. The bucket was mostly filled with a thin gruel of rice and cabbage, except that the color of the gruel was a yellowish black, and it had a sour and rotten stench. What made it even more disgusting was that there were 2 dead insects floating on top of the gruel. This was something that no one, not even a dog, would be able to eat. Eat? What are you looking at? The short, fat cook raised his spoon and hit the head of the woman next to the bucket, who had gagged and almost thrown up right there, as he yelled at her. This woman who had been let out of her cage first was from the same province as I was, Sichuan. Her name was Xie Fangfang. Because we were from the same province, I remembered this fair-skinned woman with a baby face quite well. This stuff is worse than pig slop. I'm not eating it, Xie Fangfang said stubbornly, holding one arm across her chest and the other covering her head, while shaking her head. In the sunlight, the crisscrossing whip marks and bite marks on her back were extremely conspicuous. During last night's stripping and blood draw, Xie Fangfang had resisted the most, and her situation had been the worst of all the women. She was almost beaten to death with a whip. Not eating it? The short, fat cook showed his yellow teeth and smashed Xie Fangfang in the stomach with his spoon, causing her to cry out and double over. He then grabbed her hair and shoved her head directly into the bucket. No matter how much Xie Fangfang struggled, the cook didn't let go. He only let go after Xie Fangfang almost choked to death in the bucket. After all that, Xie Fangfang was laying on the ground, her face a mask of pain as her body convulsed and she gasped for breath. Her face was covered with yellow rice and bits of cabbage. She was shaking as her body spasmed uncontrollably, like a white carp thrown on the shore, belly up and about to die. Whether it was Xie Fangfang's fair skin that triggered the cook's lustful desires, or it was because she said the food was pig slop, the short, fat cook licked his yellow teeth, said a couple of things in Burmese to his companion, threw the spoon into the bucket, grabbed Xie Fangfang by the leg, and dragged her like a dead dog towards the nearby low building. Soon, the low building was filled with the excited, animalistic laughter of the short, fat cook and the others, as well as Xie Fangfang's miserable cries of pain. Chapter 4. The Horrors of My Companions, a Glimmer of Hope for Survival. Xie Fangfang's screams pierced my heart like needles. My compatriot, a woman from my own hometown, was being violated by those Myanmar thugs. Instinctively, I clenched my fists, wanting to rush in and save her. But the last shreds of my sanity kept me biting down, not daring to move. I admit that I was afraid of dying and that I was a coward. But what was wrong with wanting to survive and return to my country one day, to see my parents again? Not just me, But everyone else locked in the dog cages remained silent as we listened to Xie Fangfang's screams. I could see in their eyes that each of us held a burning flame, but in the end, no one moved. Eat! Another Myanmar thug, taking over for the short, fat cook, banged the bucket with his spoon, sounding like he was calling pigs to their slop. Our compatriot was being inhumanly tortured in that low building not far away. How could anyone swallow this pig swill? As if sensing our thoughts, the Myanmar thug with the spoon grinned, unbuckled his pants, and pissed into the bucket. Then, he scooped up 2 handfuls of dirt from the ground and threw them in as well. Now it's even more delicious. Come and enjoy your meal. Anyone who doesn't eat, I guarantee your fate will be even worse than that woman's inside. The Myanmar thug stared at the 4 of us threateningly, raising his large spoon in the air. Several nearby Myanmar thugs with guns slowly closed in, their eyes full of menace. At that moment, my heart leaped into my throat. From last night until now, I had personally experienced just how ruthless and cruel these thugs were. You eat first, the Myanmar man with the spoon said, randomly pointing at the person to my right. The man's body immediately stiffened, and his face went deathly pale. After being hit on the head twice, the man, his face full of humiliation, walked to the bucket, grabbed a handful of the filthy cabbage gruel, and stuffed it into his mouth with his eyes closed. Ugh. Maybe the cabbage gruel, which wasn't even fit for pigs, was too disgusting, or maybe it was too filled with dirt and urine. He threw it up as soon as it went into his mouth. You bastard! How dare you waste food? Upon seeing this, the Myanmar man with the spoon cursed in broken Chinese and slammed the spoon down hard on the man's head. The force was so great that the spoon broke in 2. The man screamed as blood poured down his face, instantly staining it completely red. Even still, the Myanmar thug didn't intend to let him off the hook. The Myanmar thug who broke the spoon rushed at the man, punching and kicking him. As if that wasn't enough, he took an electric baton from one of the armed Myanmar men and repeatedly shocked him with it. It wasn't until the man was convulsing, foaming at the mouth, and had lost control of his bowels that the Myanmar thug finally stopped cursing and walked away. I was watching this, my scalp tingling. The cruelty of these Myanmar thugs had once again exceeded my expectations. It seemed that we, the people they had tricked here, were not even considered human, let alone animals, in their eyes. Continue eating, the Myanmar thug who broke the spoon said, taking a few breaths. He took out a cigarette and lit it, a look of amusement on his face. From the look in his eyes, I could tell that the animal actually wanted someone else to resist, so he would have the opportunity to vent his savage desires. I dashed toward the wooden bucket, squatted down, grabbed a handful of the cabbage gruel, and started eating it with large mouthfuls. I knew that it was impossible to avoid eating this meal. Since I had to eat it anyway, I might as well eat it early, so I wouldn't get beaten, and I wouldn't have to eat the vomit of those who ate before me. This stuff was not fit for humans. Even though I had mentally prepared myself, I almost threw up after the first bite. If this stuff was pig slop, then that was an insult to pigs. In order to not be brutally beaten and in order to survive, I finally managed to overcome the urge to vomit and swallowed the gruel, gritting my teeth. The other 2 men, seeing what I did, copied me and started eating large mouthfuls as well. After eating about a dozen mouthfuls, I stood up, indicating that I was full. I even forced a smile that was more like a grimace than anything else, and said, "Thank you." The Myanmar thug was delighted when he heard my thank you. He reached out his large, black, dirty hand, patted my face hard, and said some things in Burmese, causing the other Myanmar men with guns to laugh uproariously. I knew the thug definitely hadn't said anything nice, but at that moment, I only had one thought in mind. I had to do whatever it took to survive. As for everything else, none of it mattered at that moment. I thought that after finishing our horrible breakfast we would be put back into the dog cages, but instead, we were taken to a room in another low building. When I was taken inside, there were already 2 Myanmar men waiting. As soon as I went in, they threw a set of clothes, which looked like prison uniforms, at me. On the front and back of the shirt was the same number, 10,086. It was a long time later before I learned that not every scam compound in Myanmar gave the pigs a set of uniforms. Only the largest compounds in Myanmar did. The more unified the management of the top scam compounds, the more complete the supply chain was, and the more value they could extract from us pigs. Since you are the first from your group to walk into this building, I think you must be very smart, the younger Myanmar man sitting behind the table said in perfect Mandarin. The young Myanmar man's Mandarin was even more standard than mine, which surprised me a little. Let me introduce myself. My name is Abu. For the time being, I will be fully responsible for you. Of course, unless someone is willing to pay to redeem you, or you die early, that is." The Myanmar man, who called himself Abu, looked about my age and smiled like a friendly boy next door. After personally experiencing his methods, I realized that he was a demon in human skin, a complete and utter pervert. "Do you want to leave here alive?" After I put my clothes on, Abu indicated for me to sit in a chair opposite him. Of course, I wanted to leave. If I had a choice, I wouldn't spend another second in this horrible place. I instinctively nodded. No one knew how long they would live if they stayed there. "Good if you want to live," Abu said, his smile getting even brighter. He snapped his fingers at the Myanmar man with a gun next to him. The man very quickly took out an old-fashioned, non-smartphone and handed it to me. "You're a smart person, so you know that we're doing all this for money. We spent so much effort and time to bring you all here. It wouldn't make sense if we were just doing it to beat and torture you, would it?" What Abu said hit the nail right on the head. Chapter 5. Son, don't be afraid. Mom will save you. From last night until now, I kept telling myself that the Myanmar thugs had gone to great lengths to trick us into coming here, investing a lot of manpower, resources, and money, and at the end of the day, they had to be doing it for money. So, I always thought that as long as I showed enough value, I shouldn't have any major problems surviving. After some time, I realized that every new pig in the compound had heard what Abu had told me. Everyone has to understand that scams are just one part of the means these thugs use to extract our value. Moreover, not everyone who gets tricked into going to Myanmar lives to the day they start participating in scams. In other words, most of us didn't even have the qualifications to scam others. 200,000 yuan. If your family is willing to pay 200,000 yuan to redeem you, you can have your freedom and go home. Seeing that I was obviously already hooked, Abu had a glint of excitement in his eyes and said in a gentle voice, 200,000 yuan and I could go home? My heart was beating wildly in my chest. I even instinctively started calculating how much money my parents had. They had owned their small grocery store for over 20 years. Even if they didn't have that much savings, they could ask relatives and friends for help. They would be able to come up with 200,000 yuan, right? No matter what, I was a legitimate college graduate. Once I was back in China, I would find a good job and earn 200,000 yuan within 3 to 5 years, max. Can you really guarantee that if I pay 200,000 yuan ransom, you will let me go home? After thinking about it for a moment, I had made up my mind. Freedom was right in front of me. No matter what, I had to try. As for whether my parents were willing to spend that money to save me, I didn't take it into consideration at all. It wasn't that I didn't think that this Myanmar man called Abu was lying to me. Even if they got the money, they might not let me leave. But the cost of 200,000 yuan was not too high, and it was worth a gamble. Looking back on it now, I have slapped myself several times for my selfishness and naivety, which caused my parents' life savings to go down the drain. It was also after some time that I learned that the Myanmar thugs' seemingly simple sales pitch had actually been carefully crafted by psychologists. The ransom amount they quoted the first time was also based on the assessment of each person's individual circumstances. My friend, we are just looking for money. If everyone who comes to Myanmar dies, do you think people will still come in the future? Do you think the authorities will let us continue to exist? Abu asked with a smile, luring me into his carefully constructed logical trap. With just those two sentences, the fire of survival in my heart was burning fiercely again. Of course, if we run into someone stubborn who values their life more than money, then there is nothing we can do. Out of the 20 or so of you who came this time, we need to make an example of one of you, don't you think? As soon as Abu finished talking, the Myanmar man next to him cocked his gun, and I clearly heard the sound of the bullet being loaded. The next moment, the cold, black muzzle was pointed right at my head. To be the chicken that they used as an example? No, I wanted to survive. With that thought in mind, I instinctively picked up the old phone and, under the gaze of Abu and the other Myanmar thug, dialed my mother's number. Abu reminded me in a timely manner, "Turn on the speaker. Don't try to be too clever." After a few rings, the phone was answered. "Hello. Hello. Hello. Is this Changhua?" Hearing my mom's familiar and loving voice, I couldn't hold back anymore. I bit down hard on my lips and called out, "Mom," my voice thick with emotion. I didn't want to cry, but I just couldn't help it. "Changhua, Chong, what happened to you?" Hearing my voice as I was trying my best to hold back the tears, my mom immediately started crying on the other end of the phone. The saying a mother's heart is always with her child was absolutely true. Mom, save me, Mom. Hearing my mom crying, the last defense in my heart collapsed completely, and the humiliation and torture that I had suffered over the last few days burst out in that one sentence. Mom, save me. At that moment, a 6-foot-tall young man was crying like a child. Changhua, what happened to you? Don't scare Mom. My mom on the other end of the phone was so frightened by my heart-wrenching cry of, save me, that she couldn't even cry anymore. I could clearly hear the trembling, panic, and worry in her voice. Mom, I was tricked into coming to Myanmar. They want 200,000 yuan to let me go home. I pinched my thigh, wiped my tears hard, and forced myself to calm down. Right now, the most important thing was to leave this hellish place. Changhua, don't be afraid. Mom will save you, even if I have to give up my life to do it. You wait, and don't hang up the phone. I'm going upstairs to call your dad. My mom comforted me loudly on the phone while she was crying, and then I could vaguely hear her running down the stairs and shouting my dad's name. I knew that at that moment, my mom was definitely terrified and worried sick. Although I had always known that my parents loved me very much and were willing to do anything for me, I felt a sense of relief upon hearing the assurance in my mother's voice. What was I afraid of? Was I afraid that my parents wouldn't take out 200,000 yuan to redeem me? In this world, there are only children who don't care for their parents. There are no parents who don't care for their children. Hearing my mother stumbling as she ran up the stairs and thinking about what she had said, I will give up my life to save you. I silently vowed to be good to my parents when I returned and that I wouldn't upset them again. About a minute or so later, my dad's worried, angry, and suppressed voice could be heard on the phone. After simply saying a few words on the phone, my dad was silent for a few seconds before saying, Changhua, give them the phone? Dad, the phone is on speaker. Just talk. They can hear everything. I looked up at Abu and the other Myanmar thug opposite me. I was starting to calm down. Mr. Lee, we are only after money. As long as 200,000 yuan is in the account, I guarantee your son will be released. Before my dad could speak, Abu took the initiative to speak into the phone, as if he could see through people's hearts through the phone. After another few seconds of silence, my dad continued to speak. 200,000 yuan is too much. We can't gather that much money in a short amount of time. Mr. Lee, I'm only going to remind you once. This is the only time your son will get to call. It is up to you if you pay or not. Oh, I forgot to tell you. You only have one day to get the money together. If the money isn't in the account by tomorrow morning, your son will never make it back. After saying that, Abu hung up the phone directly without giving my dad a chance to haggle. Chapter 6. 200,000 yuan to buy a life? After making the phone call home, I was locked up in a place that resembled a prison cell. The room was about 3 to 4 square meters, with a single bed and a wooden bucket to relieve myself. Even though the cell smelled of urine, feces, and mildew, it was much better than being locked in a dog cage. Not only that, but Abu had also given me a clean white steamed bun and a bottle of mineral water. The moment I took a bite of the steamed bun, I thought it was the most delicious food in the world. Sitting alone in my cell, eating a clean steamed bun and drinking clean mineral water, I actually felt a sense of unspeakable happiness. That a steamed bun and a bottle of water could make someone so happy? Would anyone believe that? At that moment, I desperately wanted my family to deposit the 200,000 yuan into the Myanmar thug's account as quickly as possible, so I could get out of there and go back to living a normal life. As for whether my parents could come up with 200,000 yuan, how they would come up with 200,000 yuan, or whether the Myanmar thugs would actually release me after they received the money, I had long since pushed those thoughts out of my mind. It's not that I was selfish. If you had ever been locked up in a dog cage, beaten like cattle, or eaten food that even a dog wouldn't touch, then you would understand what that felt like. During the day I was locked in the cell, I didn't know what had happened to the others who had been captured with me. I also didn't know if my family had deposited the money yet. That day I was both scared and hopeful, but at the same time, I also felt a glimmer of relief and security. Now when I think back about how my mindset changed, I can't help but feel a chill about the Myanmar thugs' methods for controlling people's minds. In the midst of all those complex emotions, the day passed quickly. The next morning, I was taken out of the cell. I was not taken to the small room where I had met with Abu the day before, but instead, I was taken to a dark, damp, and blood-soaked room that resembled an interrogation room. When I entered the room and saw the shackles, machetes, axes, and other torture devices that were still stained with blood, my legs went weak. Abu ordered his men to shackle my limbs and hoist me up. While filing his nails, he said, without looking at me, It seems your parents don't want to save you. The money hasn't arrived yet. Hearing this, I was hit as if by a lightning bolt. I was completely stunned. That's impossible. I shouted furiously, my voice trembling. I didn't believe that my parents would be so heartless. 200,000 yuan was a huge sum of money for my family, but if my parents were willing, there was always a way that they could come up with the money. Don't get so worked up. The human heart is the most complicated thing in this world. The thug, Abu, looked up at me and smiled. He took out his phone and waved it at me. I am a man of my word. It has been almost a full day since you called your parents. I'm not going to say that I'm not going to give you an opportunity. I will allow you to call them again to push them, to survive, to escape from this hellhole. At that moment, I didn't care about anything else, so I immediately told Abu my family's phone number and asked him to call them for me. As soon as the phone was connected, I couldn't wait to ask, Dad, have you prepared the 200,000 yuan ransom? My dad was silent on the other end of the phone for 3 seconds before saying, in a hoarse voice, our savings are only 70,000. Your mom and I begged and borrowed from all of our relatives and friends yesterday, and we only managed to come up with 148,000. The call was on speaker, so not only could I hear what my dad said, but Abu and the other 2 Myanmar thugs could also hear it clearly. Mr. Lee, you are not being honest, and it seems you do not want to save your son, Abu said with a grin. Without any hesitation, he hung up the phone. Your dad picked up the phone after just one ring, so he must have been waiting for this phone call. It looks like your dad is a very smart and cautious man. To use a term from your country, this is called not letting go until you see the rabbit. If that's the case, then hee, Abu said, smiling, and gestured to the other Myanmar thug. He said a few things in Burmese before taking a few steps back and raising his phone to film me. The other Myanmar thug took out a black cloth and covered his face, exposing only his beady, triangle eyes. He picked up a pair of pointed pliers and started walking towards me. What are you going to do? Let me go. Seeing the Myanmar thug with the pliers approaching me, I shuddered, instinctively started struggling, and shouted, Yes, yes, struggle hard, scream hard. If you don't, your parents will think we are just trying to scare them. Abu held up the phone, laughing and praising me while he recorded the video. The masked Myanmar man grabbed my left foot, which was shackled by chains. He took off my shoe, and using the pointed pliers, ripped off the nail of my little toe. The excruciating pain caused me to instinctively scream in agony. It wasn't because I was weak-willed, but the pain was simply too great. Before that, I was just a normal college student who hadn't suffered much in life. How could I possibly bear the pain of having my nail ripped off like that? Keep going. Abu held the phone up for a close-up of my bloody left foot before slowly stepping back, ensuring that my entire body and the Myanmar thug holding the bloody pliers were in the frame. No, my parents will definitely send the money to save me. I had already experienced that excruciating pain once. Upon hearing Abu's words, I desperately struggled and shouted, trying to save the rest of my toenails. But my struggling and shouting did not make any difference. The masked Myanmar thug still used the pointed pliers to rip out all the nails of my left foot. In just 2 or 3 minutes, my clothes were soaked in sweat, and my voice was hoarse. My left foot was covered in blood, and I couldn't even bear to look at it. The pain of having my toenails ripped out was something that still made me shudder in fear just thinking about it. Just when I thought that they were done after ripping out all of the toenails on my left foot, that demon, Abu, actually got someone to hold his phone so he could film himself. He had covered his face, and he took a small saw from who knows where, grabbed my bloody foot with one hand, and started sawing off my little toe with the other. If having your toenails ripped out was within the range of a normal person's endurance, then slowly sawing off your toe was enough to make anyone want to die immediately. I don't know how long that process lasted, and I don't remember how many times I passed out from the pain. All I could think about during that time was pain and wanting to die. Now when I think back on it, I was actually pretty amazing that I was able to endure that kind of pain. Anyone else probably would have died from the pain right there and then. Chapter 7. Might as well die in Myanmar and rot in Myanmar. Later, my dad told me that after seeing the video of the Myanmar thugs sawing off the little toe on my left foot, he and my mom could no longer hold it together. My dad, a man in his 40s, burst out crying right there and then. My mom cried even more heart-wrenchingly, yelling at and hitting my dad, saying she was going to come to Myanmar to find me immediately. About an hour after my toe was sawed off, my dad had gathered 200,000 yuan and deposited it into the Myanmar thugs' account. After receiving the money, the Myanmar thugs' attitude towards me was much better than before. Abu, The man who personally sawed off the little toe on my left foot even found a doctor to treat my injury and moved me to a clean room. Compared to the dog cage I was locked in on the first day and the stinking cell I was in last night, the room I was in now was like heaven. The room, which was about 30 square meters, had a carpet on the floor. The 6-foot bed was soft and clean. The large floor-to-ceiling windows were spotless. I endured the piercing pain in my left foot and lay down on the soft, clean bed, feeling exhausted. For a moment, I was confused, unable to distinguish between reality and dream. I was just too tired these last 2 days, not only physically, but mentally too. As I lay there, I fell into a deep sleep. When I woke up again, it was already dark outside. I slowly got out of bed. After using the bathroom, Abu walked in with another Myanmar man. He was holding a bowl of tomato and egg noodles. "You've been hurt, so I had the kitchen make something light for you," Abu said, handing me the bowl of noodles with a smile. He seemed so caring. As I looked at the steaming bowl of noodles, my stomach couldn't help but rumble, and I swallowed several mouthfuls of saliva. "Whatever it is, let's eat first," Abu said with a smile. He gestured for the Myanmar thug with the gun to step back into the corner. He lit a cigarette, pulled up a chair, sat by the window with his back to me, as if admiring the pitch-black night sky outside. That thug was right. Whatever it was, I had to eat first. I picked up my chopsticks and started eating it with large mouthfuls. In less than 2 minutes, I had finished the entire bowl of tomato and egg noodles. There wasn't a single drop of soup left. Since being tricked into this place the other night, this was, strictly speaking, the first real meal I had had. I never would have dreamed that this ordinary bowl of tomato and egg noodles would become something I would miss for a long time afterward. I can't count the nights that I would think of the taste of the noodles and feel hungry. "When are you going to let me go?" I asked impatiently, after putting the bowl and chopsticks on the coffee table to the side. "Looks like you were really hungry," Abu said, glancing at the empty bowl. He put his cigarette out in the ashtray on the coffee table. "Yesterday, you personally said that as long as my family paid 200,000 yuan in ransom and the money arrived, you would let me leave." I tried my best to control my emotions, trying not to shout. At that moment, I still had illusions that those thugs would keep their promise. "Of course, I am a man of my word. You would have been able to leave after the 200,000 ransom was paid. But because of your dad's intelligence and caution, we had to use some small methods to make him believe your true experience and situation. Me and my friends went through so much trouble," Abu said, shrugging, and pointed at my bandaged left foot. He continued, his smile full of amusement. "It wouldn't be too much if we asked for a little bit of a processing fee, right? We also paid for the doctor to treat your injury, including this room you're staying in today, and that bowl of noodles. These fees are not included in the 200,000 yuan ransom." After hearing what that thug, Abu, said, it was like a bucket of cold water had been poured on my head in the dead of winter. I shivered all over, my teeth chattering. I really wanted to jump up and bite that thug to death. They ripped out all the nails on my foot and sawed off one of my toes, and they were still trying to extort a processing fee. If it wasn't for the last shred of my sanity, which was repeatedly telling me not to be impulsive, I would have already jumped on that thug, Abu. The sweet dream that my family would use ransom money to save me was instantly shattered at that moment. I had never been an idiot. It was just that I had wanted to leave this place too much. Now I had completely come to my senses. They could use medical treatment and room and board as an excuse to continue to ask for more money the second time, and a third time, and even ask for money just for breathing the air. It was never going to end, until my family could no longer come up with even a cent. I regretted it so much. If I hadn't been so desperate to escape this place, to leave this flesh-eating hellhole, my parents wouldn't have used their life savings to feed those dogs. But now that the money was in those Myanmar thugs' accounts, it was too late. "How much more money do I need to give you, so I can leave this place?" After I had completely come to my senses, I smiled coldly on the inside, but on the outside, I asked calmly. 30,000, Abu said, taking out another cigarette. He held up 3 fingers with a smile. "Okay, I'll call my family tomorrow." "This time you absolutely have to keep your word," I said, pretending to grit my teeth and agree. After all, I had already given them 200,000 yuan. Anyone would be okay with paying another 30,000. "Don't worry, I, Abu, am a man of my word. As long as your family sends another 30,000 yuan tomorrow, I guarantee that I will let you leave. You can rest well here tonight. I'll have someone arrange to take you away tomorrow." After hearing the answer he wanted, Abu's smile got even bigger. Before leaving, he made sure to express concern for me. After seeing Abu and the Myanmar thug with a gun out of the door, I pretended to go to the bathroom. As soon as I went in and closed the door, the tears came out. I put my hand in my mouth and bit down hard, trying my best not to cry out loud. A few minutes after I had woken up, Abu had come in with a freshly cooked bowl of tomato and egg noodles. This meant that every move I made in the room was very likely being watched by those thugs. I knew my life would very likely be completely over. I might very well end up rotting in this place. I can't drag my parents down anymore. People die every day. Might as well die here and rot here. After crying, I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was pale and exhausted, and my eyes were bloodshot. I silently made a decision. All of my previous illusions were completely broken along with that little toe. From now on, I would either die here and rot here, or I would escape this living hell on my own. Chapter 8. Broken Illusions, Imprisoned in a Water Dungeon. As I slept on the clean, soft bed, that night I greedily hugged the blanket, enjoying what would perhaps be the last time I would feel warm and comfortable in my life. I didn't even want to fall asleep, because I knew very well that, starting tomorrow, I would likely be living in hell. Clean food and a soft, comfortable bed would be a luxury that I would not even dare to imagine. Before I knew it, exhausted in body and mind, I eventually fell into a deep sleep. Until the next morning, when that thug, Abu, woke me up. Get up and eat breakfast. After you eat breakfast, call your family. As long as your family sends another 30,000 yuan, you can leave. Abu was smiling even more warmly than the sunlight coming through the window, but I didn't feel any warmth in his smile at all. Okay, I said, pretending to be excited. I threw back the blanket and got out of bed, quickly finishing the white porridge and steamed bun that he brought to me. This time, I wasn't taken to the cell where my toe had been sawed off, but to the small room where I had first met that thug. I didn't even have to tell him the number. That thug, Abu, was very skilled at dialing my family's number, putting the phone on speaker, and placing it in front of me. The phone was answered after only 2 rings. Changhua, how are you doing, Changhua? Hearing my mother crying on the phone, my nose prickled and I almost cried too. But I knew that this was not the time to cry, because this could be the last time I would ever talk to my family, the last time I would hear my mother's voice. Mom, don't cry. I'm okay. I pinched my thigh hard, trying to hold back the tears, as I comforted my mom on the phone. Changhua, we have given them the money. When are you coming home? Your dad and I will come pick you up. Pick me up? Hearing my mom's words, a sense of sadness and despair washed over me. Perhaps, after I died, when the police raided this hellhole, what was left of my body, just a pile of bones, would be able to go home. Returning alive was next to impossible. Changhua, I'm going to buy train tickets to Yunnan with your mom, and then? My dad was interrupted by me, just as he was about to finish talking. I had seen the impatience in that thug, Abu's, eyes. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to say everything to my parents before that thug hung up the phone. Dad, Mom, I can come back by myself. Just stay at home and look after the house. Dad, Mom, I'm sorry, I won't have to not listen to you anymore. As I spoke, I observed Abu's expression out of the corner of my eye. Seeing his face begin to turn grim, I knew that the time I had left was limited. I quickly spoke, don't give them any more money. Don't send even 1 more cent. No matter how much money you give them, these bastards will never let me go back. Bang. As soon as I said that, Abu hit me hard on the head with a baton. Mom and Dad, if there is a next life, I still want to be your son. Enduring the sharp pain in my head, before that dog, Abu, could hang up the phone, I shouted my last words, my face covered in tears. As soon as I said that, I was hit hard on the head twice more. You dare to play me? I think you're tired of living. Hit him. Beat him to death. Abu was furious. He was swearing and hitting me with the baton. Ha 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 ha. You want to use me to scam my parents out of their hard-earned money? You can dream on, dog. You can kill me here today, if you have the guts. I said, like I couldn't feel the pain. I let them hit me with the baton. I was covered in blood, and I laughed like a madman. After everything that had happened the night before, I had already thought about dying. Since it would be impossible to escape anyway, living like an animal in this hellhole was worse than death. In this place, death was a relief. After hitting me on the head and body more than a dozen times, that thug, Abu, finally dropped the baton. He lit a cigarette and took a few moments to calm himself down before squatting on the ground and grabbing my hair. He said with a sneer, It won't be that easy to die. I won't let you die easily until I've squeezed out every last drop of oil in your bones." After saying that, he slammed my head on the ground before standing up and ordering the other Myanmar thug, "First, drag this pig out to be branded, and then throw him into the water dungeon for a few days." I was half dead from the beating. I was dragged out like a dead dog. At that moment, I didn't even have the strength to move a finger, let alone struggle. Even if I did have the strength, I wouldn't want to struggle. I wanted to die. What was the point of living in a place like this? It was better to die as soon as possible. The thing I regretted most was that I had caused my parents to waste their life savings on those thugs. But it was too late to say anything. I owed my parents too much. I would pay it all back slowly in the next life. With the desire to die in my heart, I let them do whatever they wanted. I watched as those thugs branded me like they branded livestock, using a hot iron on the back of my neck. At that moment, I even smelled the charred odor of burnt meat. Now you know why I like to wear collared shirts all year round, right? It's because I don't want people to see the humiliating brand on the back of my neck. If you ever see someone with a dragon boat flower, red spider, or cobra brand on the back of their neck, don't doubt it. That person definitely came back from Myanmar. No matter how that person came back, you must stay away from them immediately. Even if they escaped from Myanmar just like me, you should still stay away from them. Because a person who has been tortured inhumanly like that, their psychology is already twisted. Even a very small thing can cause them to act rashly. After being branded with the dragon boat flower, I was locked in a water dungeon. It was called a water dungeon, but it was more like a fecal dungeon, because it was even more terrifying than a cesspool. I don't know how long the water in the water dungeon had been there. It was about 1.5 meters deep. The surface of the water was covered with dead rats, dead snakes, and dead bodies of unknown insects. The color of the water was even darker than Coca-Cola. It was a paradise for flies and maggots. Any normal person who smelled the stench from that pool of water from hundreds of meters away would throw up their dinner from the previous night, let alone be locked in it. Even though I wasn't afraid of death anymore, the moment I was locked in that water dungeon, I felt a deep sense of fear from the bottom of my heart. Compared to being locked in a place like this, I would rather die immediately. Chapter 9. A Woman in the Water Dungeon. The height of the cage in the water dungeon was only about 1.6 meters. I was 6 feet tall, and I had to squat to be able to fit in there. The water was 1.5 meters deep, and the cage was 1.6 meters. If I didn't make an effort to look upwards, water would go right into my mouth and nose. Not far from my head, there was a dead rat floating there. A bunch of flies were buzzing around the dead rat, and maggots were happily crawling in and out of the rat's body. The rotten stench caused my stomach to churn, and a strong urge to vomit hit my throat. Ugh. Don't throw up. If you throw up, you don't know how many flies and maggots will come. Also, if you throw up the food in your stomach, the probability of you getting out of the water dungeon alive will be even lower. Just as I was about to throw up, a weak female voice came from behind me, forcing me to swallow the vomit that had already reached my throat. I turned around slowly, and with great effort. I saw a woman with long hair curled up in the corner of the adjacent water dungeon. "You were probably tricked into coming to Myanmar just these past 2 days, right?" the woman asked, pushing the hair away from her face. It seemed as if she was looking at me carefully. I hesitated for a moment, but I just hummed to indicate I had heard her. To be able to be in the water dungeon so soon after joining the compound, the woman only said half the sentence. It was as if she had swallowed the rest of it. I wasn't interested in this woman in the water dungeon or what she said. Right now, all I wanted to do was end my life with as little suffering as possible. Looking at the foul and turbid water, as well as the dead rat and the dead bodies of unknown insects floating not far away, I couldn't help but think that the water must have at least thousands of different types of poisonous bacteria. If I drank this dirty water, I was sure that no one, not even the greatest doctor of all time, could save me. I opened my mouth and tried it several times, but the water was just too disgusting. I just couldn't bring myself to drink it. Should I use my hand to bring the dead rat closer and eat that? The dead rat had been soaking in the dirty water for an unknown amount of time, so the poisonous bacteria inside of it would likely be even more dangerous than the water. Just as I was hesitating as to whether or not to take a risk and kill myself this way, the woman in the water dungeon next to me spoke again. "You want to kill yourself to end it all? I advise you to give up on trying to poison yourself with the water in the water dungeon, because a long time ago someone already tried it. No matter how much water they drank, they didn't die." The woman's words made my whole body tremble. I was glad that I didn't act on the spur of the moment and drink a couple of mouthfuls of this dirty water. After being locked in a place like this, it's better to die than to live like an animal, or less. I looked up at the blue sky and white clouds outside of the water dungeon and, thinking of my parents back home, I couldn't help but cry again. If you really want to die, I can help you, the woman said, grabbing onto the bar at the top of the water dungeon. It was thicker than an adult's arm, and she moved her head slowly towards me. She wasn't tall, probably about 5'3". To keep the dirty water out of her mouth and nose, she was working very hard. After making her way to a place not too far from me, the woman continued to speak. This water can't poison you, but it can drown you. If you really want to die, put your head underwater. I can help you hold it under. The woman was very serious, and I could tell that she genuinely wanted to help me. Did I really want to die that much? I didn't know why, but at that moment, I hesitated. Seeing that I didn't say anything, the woman slowly moved the long hair that was covering most of her face and pulled a few strands of her hair back into a small ponytail. That was the first time that I really saw what the woman looked like. Or rather, I could only see her facial features and face shape. Because her face was covered in dirt. It was really dirty. There was not one clean spot on her entire face. Even though I could only make out her facial features and face shape, I could still tell that she was a beautiful woman. You don't want to die. You just think that you will never be able to escape from this place, and you don't want to be whipped and tortured like cattle every day. Is that right? The woman was looking into my eyes, as if she could already see into my heart. I nodded slightly, not denying it. I have a suggestion for you. Would you like to hear it? The woman said, the corners of her mouth curving slightly. I think she must have been smiling. Before I could respond, the woman continued. Since you aren't even afraid of dying, why don't you take a chance and try to escape? Even if you fail, the worst that can happen is that you get tortured and killed. Also, if you really have to die, you should leave an unforgettable memory with those Myanmar thugs. The more the woman spoke, the more emotional she became. The hatred and madness in her eyes made me feel a little uneasy. When she talked about leaving an unforgettable memory with the Myanmar thugs before she died, it was probably something like biting off a piece of flesh from them. But the woman's words had instantly awakened me. Yes, since I wasn't even afraid of death, then what was there to be afraid of? Why didn't I try everything I could to escape? Even if I failed, the worst that could happen was that I would be tortured to death by those Myanmar thugs. You're right. I can't die so easily. Even if I do die, I need to kill 1 or 2 Myanmar bastards to feel okay with it. At that moment, the first face that popped into my head was Abu's face. That bastard was the one that had caused my parents to waste their life savings on those dogs. If there was anyone in the world that I wanted to kill, it was definitely Abu. Aside from Abu, the person I hated the most was that bitch, Zhang Fengfeng. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't be in this situation today. I will not let those 2 dogs have an easy death, even if I have to die in the process. Seeing that I had listened to what she had said, the woman finally smiled happily. She reached out her right hand and said, My name is Yushto. I'm from Hunan Province. What's your name? Li Chong. I'm from Sichuan Province, I said, as I reached out and took her small hand, signaling that we were officially introduced. After that, the woman named Yushio and I started to talk quietly in the water dungeon. When I found out that she had been tricked into this place for over 2 months, I was absolutely shocked. I had only been here for 2 days, and I had already wanted to kill myself to end it all. I didn't even want to think about how Yushio had managed to survive these past 2 months. Moreover, she was a woman. I had seen the tragic fate of Xie Fengfeng with my own eyes. Just because she had said that the food was bad, she was beaten by the Myanmar thug chef and then dragged into a low building where she was violated by several thugs. There were only Yushio and I in the large water dungeon. This showed that she was not just an average person either, or she wouldn't have been locked up here. In this hellhole, the people who resist and won't give in suffer the most torture, and their situation is even more tragic. Although Yushio didn't talk about what she had experienced in the past 2 months, I knew that it was a miracle that this woman was still alive. Chapter 10. A Glimmer of Hope for Escape. If you want to escape this place, the first thing you need to do is to figure out how to get out of the water dungeon. Aside from running online scam operations, this compound is also involved in human organ trafficking and sex work. Yushio slowly told me about the things that she had learned in the past 2 months. According to her, when people first arrived at the compound, the first thing they did was to get money from their families under the guise of ransom. They would continue to do this until they couldn't squeeze out even 1 more cent. I had personally experienced this and could relate deeply to what Yushio had said. After they could no longer get money from their families, these Myanmar thugs would assign us, pigs, to work on online scams. Those who were good at online scams would stay on to do that work. Those who weren't good at it would be assigned to other industries. Women were usually assigned to sex work. The situation for men was much more tragic. If they couldn't get money for the Myanmar thugs, most people would be killed after having all of their valuable organs removed. Their bodies would then be used as fertilizer. The women who worked in sex work would only live for 1 to 2 years, and they would eventually be sold for their organs, and their bodies would be used as fertilizer as well. In other words, even when we pigs died, it was unlikely that we would have an intact body. It was probably a good thing for those who accidentally died by the hands of the Myanmar thugs in the compound. They would just be buried in a hole that was dug randomly. There are only 3 ways to leave this compound. The first is to find a way to escape on your own, but that's very difficult. In the 2 months that I've been in the compound, I've never heard of anyone who succeeded. These Myanmar thugs control the compound much more strictly than we can imagine, Yushio said to me, her expression serious, after generally talking about the compound. I've seen that for myself. There are 3 to 4 meter high walls around the compound, and there is barbed wire on top of them, I said, nodding in agreement. A deep sense of helplessness washed over me. Not only that, but people with guns patrol the compound 24 hours a day, and there are several checkpoints outside the compound. Even if you're lucky enough to escape from the compound, it will be very hard to get through those checkpoints alive, Yushio added, after letting out a long breath. There were several checkpoints outside of the compound? Those Myanmar thugs were really watching us carefully. The security measures were probably even more strict than many prisons in my country. So the first way of leaving the compound is almost impossible, Yushio said, her expression grave. The second way is to wait until your organs are a successful match, and then you will be taken out of the compound to a professional medical facility to have your organs transplanted. You probably were also given a blood test when you first entered the compound, right? Yushio asked, as she gave me a meaningful look. I nodded subconsciously. I would never forget the humiliating experience of being stripped naked, having blood drawn, and having my anus and genitals examined on my first night in the compound. If there aren't any unforeseen circumstances, your information will likely be in a database of human organ trafficking operations all over the world. Now all they're waiting for is a successful match. I understood what Yushio meant. If one of my organs was a successful match for some rich person who was terminally ill or had organ failure, then I would be able to leave this hellhole. This method of leaving the compound is, in theory, something that everyone has a chance at, but the survival rate is very, very low. Under no circumstances should you put your hope in this method unless you absolutely have to, Yushio said, pausing for a moment. Then her eyes sparkled as she looked at me, her gaze intense. I felt uneasy as she stared at me that way. The third method is to actively try to get involved in sex work. You have a good body and good looks. Your body is probably your only asset in this compound. In the compound that we're in, there are a total of 4 people in charge. They are in charge of extracting money when people enter the compound, online scams, human organs, and the sex industry. The one in charge of the sex industry is called Li Fei. She's probably in her 30s. I've heard that that woman has a big background and that she has close ties with the compound's big boss. After saying that, Yushio stared at me and said, if you want to escape this hellhole alive, the only way is to attract Li Fei's attention and work under her. What Yushio said at first didn't seem to have any problems, but after thinking about it carefully, it wasn't right. I know that I am good-looking and that I have a good body, but to believe that I could attract the attention of a middle-aged woman, work under her, and then escape this place is something I could never believe. If it were as simple as Yushio said, someone in the compound would probably have already used this method to escape. If I really can make that woman, Li Fei, take a special interest in me, what good would that do for you? Although I had only been tricked into coming to Myanmar 3 days ago, the things I had experienced in those 3 days were more than I had experienced in the past 10 years. It was impossible for me to really trust anyone just by hearing a few words from them, no matter who that person was. I forgot to tell you that I actually work for Li Fei. If you can make Li Fei take a special interest in you, then we can find a way to work together and escape. Li Fei, like us, is also from China. Her lifestyle habits are different than Myanmar people, and she doesn't like to stay in the compound all the time. She goes out for a few days each month. Going out of the compound with Li Fei is our only opportunity. I admit that Yushio's words had moved me. I knew very well that this woman was definitely hiding something from me. But what did it matter? We were strangers who had met by chance. What reason did another person have to pour their heart out to me as soon as we had just met? Even if I was being used, I should be grateful. At least I had value. Besides, I wasn't afraid of death. Why would I care if I was being used? I was willing to believe in Yushio and try the method that she suggested. The most important reason was that I could see in her eyes that Yushio was truly determined to escape. Later, I found out that Li Fei was extremely indulgent and also extremely twisted and perverted. If anything didn't go her way, she would cut off someone's hand and feed it to the dogs. In Li Fei's eyes, we were nothing more than tools that she used to satisfy her lust for pleasure and perverted desires. After going through many difficulties to finally get into Li Fei's good graces, I was tortured by that bitch several times. But I never blamed Yushio, because she had at least given me a possibility of escaping this hellhole alive. In fact, I was able to escape alive because of Li Fei. Of course, the things that I had to do to please that bitch and to get her trust were things that normal people wouldn't even imagine. The time that I spent by Li Fei's side was worse than how a pig or a dog would live. Chapter 11. Nearly died in the water dungeon. The sun was blazing today, and even though it wasn't noon yet, the temperature had already climbed past 30 degrees Celsius. The sun's heat seemed to bring every fly and maggot in the water dungeon to life, both those on the surface and those beneath. As the weather warmed, the indescribable stench grew even more unbearable. The harsh sun had cracked my lips and made my head spin. I felt like a fish about to dry out and die. What was even harder to endure was the way my wounds throbbed and itched after being submerged for hours in the filthy water, teeming with who knows how many bacteria. My left foot, where a toenail had been ripped off and a toe had been partially sawed through, felt like thousands of ants were gnawing at it, burrowing their way deeper into my flesh. I desperately wanted to scratch it, but I couldn't reach it. The sensation was excruciating. I knew very well that if things continued this way, I wouldn't last much longer. I'd die here. "You have a fever," Yushio said, wading through the water to reach me. She touched my forehead with worry in her voice. "I know, it's probably an infection," I replied weakly. My head, already feeling heavy with sleepiness, suddenly dipped into the water. I gulped down 2 large mouthfuls of the foul liquid, which sent me into a violent fit of coughing. "Hang in there. Try to keep your head up. Whatever you do, don't swallow the water in this dungeon." Yushio, startled, used her strength to lift my chin, reminding me urgently. The mouthfuls of dirty water actually cleared my head a little. I forced myself to face the sky, gripping the bars of the cage tightly, determined not to fall back into the water. "Help! Someone's dying here. Help! I know I was wrong, please, let us out." Seeing me in such a state, Yushio started shouting at the top of her lungs. She screamed for a good half hour, until her throat was raw and her voice was hoarse. Finally, a Burmese thug with a cigarette dangling from his lips came over, his brow furrowed. "Shut your damn mouth," he yelled at us as soon as he arrived, the Burmese thug who was responsible for guarding the water dungeon. I figured that if Yushio hadn't been so annoyingly loud, this thug probably wouldn't have bothered coming at all. In the intense heat, the water dungeon was so foul that anyone who got too close would likely throw up on the spot. It was no wonder that the Burmese thug guarding it didn't want to come anywhere near it. "If you leave him in this dungeon any longer, he'll die. Please, let us out. We really know that we were wrong and will never do it again." Yushio's voice was raspy as she spoke. "He's only been in the compound for 3 days. He's still a valuable commodity, and if he dies in this water dungeon, you'll be losing out." At the same time, she subtly kicked me in the water. Now that I had a sliver of hope for survival, I wasn't about to just rot away in the dungeon. Gathering all my remaining strength, I looked up at the Burmese thug. "Big brother, I was wrong. I really was. I promise I'll listen to you after I get out of here. I'll do whatever you tell me to do. Big brother, if you let me out, I will be forever grateful." In this Burmese hellhole, where death and organ harvesting lurked around every corner, dignity and pride were worthless. For that single chance of escape, I wouldn't hesitate to call this Burmese thug Big Brother, or even lick his shoes if that's what it took. Grateful to me? The Burmese thug seemed amused by the absurdity of it all. He walked over to where I was, his face contorted with a cruel smile, and stomped down on my right hand, which was gripping the cage, grinding his heel in a half circle. The pain was so intense that I let out a scream and my senses were completely clear. "Big brother, be careful with his fingers. Don't break them, or Sister Faye will be very angry." Yushio quickly tried to pry the thug's foot off my hand, while at the same time mentioning Li Fei, one of the powerful figures in the compound. Everyone in the compound, Both the captives and the Burmese workers were terrified of Li Fei. Her name had enough power that the thug immediately pulled his foot away. The Burmese thug's gaze shifted between Yushio and me before he narrowed his eyes and asked, "You're with Sister Fei?" "My name is Yushio, and I'm in charge of feeding Sister Fei's pets. I spilled some of her pet's food by accident, which is why I was punished with the water dungeon. His name is Li Chong. He's only been in the compound for 3 days. Sister Fei has seen his file and is very interested in him." Hearing Yushio's clear, detailed explanation, the thug was about 80% convinced. Although the 4 managers in the compound were theoretically in charge of their own areas, Li Fei's overbearing nature and control freak tendencies, not to mention her suspected connections to the big boss, meant the other 3 managers avoided crossing her as much as possible. "Big brother, please send a message to Sister Fei. Tell her that we know we were wrong and that after we get out of the water dungeon, we'll be her obedient dogs. She can tell us to go east, and we'll never go west. Please, beg her to give us another chance. Big brother, if we can get out of this dungeon, I swear on my life that I'll repay you. I'll fulfill any request. You must know the standards Sister Fei has for choosing people. When the time comes, I will make sure you will be satisfied." Yushio's last sentence confused me. It sounded like she was just writing an IOU with empty promises, just to give the guy some hope. Could this Burmese thug actually fall for such a promise? "You'll really repay me and fulfill any request I have?" The thug's eyes lit up as he licked his lips, looking at Yushio with a lecherous stare. "I promise." Yushio nodded emphatically, her gaze filled with a feigned sincerity. I couldn't help but wonder. Yushio had already been trapped in this scam compound for 2 months, so it was doubtful she still had any valuables on her. What could she possibly offer the thug? The only thing that she could probably use was her body. Was she really going to offer herself as payment? And what about what she said about Li Fei reading my file and being interested in me? Was that the truth, or had she made it up on the fly? Listening to Yushio and the Burmese thug talk, questions and doubts kept flooding my mind. Maybe Yushio's promise moved him, or perhaps he was too scared to let us die in the water dungeon. After all, anyone stuck with the job of guarding the water dungeon couldn't have a high position in the compound. After Yushio spoke to him for a bit more, the Burmese thug hesitated before finally opening the water dungeon. Chapter 12. Escape alive and take Yushio with me. With Yushio's help, I struggled and finally managed to crawl out of the water dungeon. Lying beside the dungeon, which was filled with maggots and flies, I felt like a fish that had almost suffocated, gasping for breath in huge, painful gulps. Yushio, who had pushed me out of the dungeon before forcing herself to climb out, was also exhausted. After all, she had spent even more time in the water dungeon than I had. "You 2 pigs stink worse than the shit in a cesspit." The jailer, a filthy thug from northern Myanmar, complained as he pinched his nose in disgust. He grabbed a water hose nearby, turned on the high-pressure water gun, and started spraying us. I'd been sprayed with a high-pressure water gun when I was first tricked into northern Myanmar, locked in a dog cage. Back then, I felt both humiliated and in pain. But now, as the high-pressure water sprayed over me, I actually felt a strange sense of relief and even enjoyment. The pain of the water gun was unbearable, but it helped wash away the filth on my body. In some sense, it served as a form of cleansing and disinfecting. I lay on the ground, curled up with my hands over my head, letting the thug spray me down. I silently prayed he would spray a little longer, hoping it would wash me cleaner. 2 or 3 minutes later, the high-pressure water stopped. Only then did I slowly release my hands, open my eyes, and sit up. Though I still smelled, the stench was much less intense than when I had been in the dungeon. I lifted my head and saw Yushio, who had also crawled up from the ground. Her prison uniform, marked with a number, clung tightly to her body, making her curves all the more obvious. Yushio's skin was even whiter than my old friend Xie Fangfang's, and her figure was more voluptuous. She had long legs, a narrow waist, and a full chest. Even though I had seen the naked bodies of several of my companions, including a few young women, that first night in the compound, none of them compared to Yushio's. I knew I shouldn't stare, and it was impolite, but my eyes were glued to her body as if drawn by magnets, unable to look away. After all, I was only 22, just a young man who had recently graduated from university and experienced one brief romance. I was full of youthful vigor. Until Yushio lifted her long hair that had fallen in front of her, casually pulling it back. When I saw her face clearly, all the desire and impulse I had felt earlier vanished instantly. My God, what kind of face was that? It was covered in intersecting, scarlet knife scars, burns from cigarette butts, and scratches I couldn't even identify. I could guarantee that if Yushio's face were seen by children at a kindergarten gate, not a single one would stay calm. They'd all burst into tears. You dare to play me like this, looking like that, and think you can repay me? The thug from northern Myanmar, shocked by Yushio's now clean face, swore as he rushed up and started punching and kicking her, as if he felt deeply insulted. It was clear this thug was enraged, showing no mercy in his punches and kicks. Each hit was full of brutal force. When I saw him grab Yushio's hair and try to throw her back into the water dungeon, I quickly scanned the surroundings. The nearest thug holding a gun was still several hundred meters away. Should I just kill this bastard? At that moment, I made up my mind. Yushio had only ended up in this situation because she had helped me. I couldn't stand by and watch her get beaten to death and thrown back into the dungeon. Just as I was preparing to move, Yushio, noticing my intentions, shot me a look signaling me not to act impulsively. Then, as if making an important decision, she grabbed the thug's leg, stopping him. Big brother, my face may be ruined, but my body's fine. After all, you're not interested in my face, right? Her words seemed to snap the thug out of his rage. His grip loosened for a moment, and I saw his eyes roam over her body, a feral lust igniting within them. Go take your clothes off, wash yourself thoroughly with soap, inside and out. I don't want to catch any diseases. The thug grinned as he roughly groped her, but then paused, as though remembering something, and stopped before taking her clothes off. Yushio glanced at me subtly, nodded, and then walked over to the water tap. Right in front of both me and the thug, she began to slowly undress, revealing the clothes that were already soaked. Now, this woman's body is quite something. If her face wasn't ruined, she could definitely fetch a good price. The thug muttered to himself, his breathing growing heavier as he watched Yushio undress. If he hadn't feared the diseases she might be carrying from the dungeon, he would have probably attacked her by now. I stared at Yushio, feeling a strange, helpless longing in my chest. I was certain that her body was the most beautiful and captivating I had ever seen, far surpassing anything I'd seen in real life or in those small movies. Just thinking about how, in a few minutes, this thug would be forcing himself on her, tormenting her, made my heart ache like a sharp needle. What the hell is wrong with me? In this hellish nightmare of a place, where death could come at any moment, I still found myself thinking about such things. I forced myself not to watch her wash, and even harder not to imagine what would happen next. But the more I tried not to think about it, the clearer those images became. What could I do in this situation? Yushio had done all this, partly for herself, yes, but more importantly, for me. She probably wanted to use me to escape this hellhole. But right now, it was all to keep me from dying in that dungeon. If I just charged in and killed this bastard, the consequences for both me and Yushio would be disastrous. My mind was in chaos, and after much deliberation, I had no choice but to watch as the thug took Yushio into a nearby small building. Before leaving, Yushio subtly pointed to the soap. As I watched her walk away, my fists clenched so tightly that my nails dug into my skin, my teeth almost grinding to dust. After Yushio and the thug entered the room, I didn't make a sound. Slap, slap, slap. I didn't know how to vent my anger and frustration, so I began slapping myself across the face. I slapped myself 7 or 8 times before wiping away the tears and picking up the soap, scrubbing my body with all my might. At that moment, only one thought was in my mind. Survive, escape, and take Yushio with me. Chapter 13. I want to kill that bastard. A dozen or so minutes later, Yushio emerged from the room, limping, with that smug-looking Burmese bastard trailing behind her. As they got closer, I saw a faint teeth mark on her neck. It wasn't a love bite. It was the kind where the skin had been broken, blood drawn. It looked a lot like the bite I'd received from a stray dog when I was a kid in the countryside. And how could a woman be limping after a normal encounter like that? It wasn't like this was her first time. I knew full well that in those minutes in that shack, Yushio had been subjected to inhumane torture. At that moment, I felt a strong urge to kill. I wanted to murder the repulsive Burmese bastard in front of me, even more urgently than I wanted to kill Abu, that dog**T. But I knew I couldn't do anything right now. Otherwise, Yushio's suffering would have been for nothing. To prevent the Burmese bastard from noticing the change in my eyes, I could only pretend to be scared and lower my head as they approached. Brother, Yushio said, putting on a meek and pitiful act, please tell Sister Faye that if we can get out of the water prison this time, I guarantee I'll be at her beck and call. She shot a glance at me and then begged the guard again. Seeing as you're so sensible, I'll go tell Sister Faye, but whether she lets you out or not depends on your own luck, the Burmese bastard said. And remember what you said just now. From now on, you're my little bitch, and you'll come whenever I call. He seemed pretty satisfied with those minutes in the shack. Unexpectedly, he didn't turn on her. Or maybe it was because he got a taste of Yushio and wanted to keep her as his personal property. Yes, I'll listen to you from now on and be your little bitch, Yushio replied, forcing a fawning smile, like a dog trying to please its master. Just wait here obediently, the Burmese bastard said, chuckling triumphantly. He pinched Yushio, kicked me a couple of times as a warning, and then hummed a tune as he walked away. No sooner had the Burmese bastard left than Yushio suddenly clutched her stomach in pain and squatted down. Yushio, what's wrong? Startled by her sudden movement, I rushed over and helped her up, asking in a low voice through gritted teeth. It's nothing, just very sore down there, she said, her face pale. That Burmese bastard, he's useless. He's a psychopathic animal. She gave a weary smile, but didn't elaborate. Damn it, if I get the chance, I'll kill that bastard. Seeing Yushio in so much pain, I wanted to rush over and kill that son of a bitch right now. Don't say such foolish things. Compared to having my organs harvested and being killed and turned into fertilizer, the suffering I'm going through is nothing, she said. Our goal is to escape this hellhole alive. I don't want to die here or rot here. She grabbed my arm tightly and slowly leaned against me, squatting on the ground. It seemed to ease the pain a bit. I shifted my body closer, trying to make her more comfortable. Remember, only by living can we have a chance to escape, she said. Her grip on my arm tightened until I nodded in agreement. Later, when I was lucky enough to escape from that hellhole alive, Yushio's encouragement and warning today played a big part. If I hadn't always remembered her words, only by living can we have a chance to escape, I probably would have died countless times. If Sister Faye's people come later, you must find a way to stay by her side, she said. Absolutely do not get involved in telecom fraud. After resting for a while on the ground, Yushio, with my help, managed to stand up with difficulty. She went to the water tap, took off her pants and began to wash herself, her back to me, while giving me a soft warning. I clearly saw the bloody scratches and teeth marks all over her legs. I didn't even need to think about who had done it. It was definitely that Burmese bastard from earlier. Yet, Yushio hadn't let out a single cry of pain. Instead, she was putting my well-being above her own. My eyes grew red as I took a deep breath, forcing myself not to look at her new wounds. Otherwise, I was afraid I wouldn't be able to control myself and would recklessly kill that perverted bastard who tortured her. Why can't I get involved in telecom fraud? I finally asked, after suppressing the homicidal urge inside me. In this telecom fraud park, telecom fraud and human organ harvesting are closely intertwined. Or, to be more precise, the endpoint of telecom fraud is human organ harvesting, she explained. Of course, if you can rake in a few million, or even more each month for the park, you're a golden goose. Nobody would be willing to kill the goose that lays golden eggs. The thing is, 99% of people can't last 6 months in the telecom fraud business. Not meeting targets for 1 month means a water prison or a broken limb. If you don't meet your targets for 2 months, you're dead. Saying this, Yushio, gritting her teeth against the pain, put her barely dry pants back on, and turned to me with a grave expression. No matter how clever the telecom fraud tricks are, in the end you must trick people out of their money. The initiative is always in their hands. Who can guarantee that they can always con others out of hundreds of thousands or millions just by making calls each month? She was right. Who could guarantee that? I couldn't even con someone out of a few hundred, let alone a few million. The sex trade is different. If you're attractive and lucky, you might get bought by a local or overseas tycoon. At that point, whether you want to escape or do something else, it's going to be much easier than in the park, she continued. Even if you're unlucky and end up in a brothel, the security is still much lower than in the park. Most importantly, you'll survive longer working in the sex trade than in telecom fraud. Listening to her analysis, I finally understood why she had repeatedly emphasized that I should try to get under Li Fei. As she said, from whatever angle you looked at it, working in the sex trade would give me a much better chance of escaping, and I'd survive longer. Even if it was just an extra month, it was still another sliver of hope. I understand. When Li Fei's people come, I'll make sure to put on a good performance, I said. I knew that. Whether I could go to work under Li Fei's hand in the sex trade would be key to escaping this hellhole alive. I had to get transferred no matter what. What I didn't expect was that Abu, that bastard, was clinging to me like a venomous snake, unwilling to let go. Chapter 14. The Law of the Jungle. Fate always seems to enjoy playing tricks on me. Instead of Li Fei's people, it was Abu, that bastard, who showed up at the water prison first. I never expected Abu to actually visit such a filthy and stinking place like the water prison himself. As soon as he arrived, all the plans Yushio and I had just made were immediately nullified. Without any surprise, Abu took me away. Before leaving, Yushio and I exchanged a knowing glance, but said nothing. It seemed that getting transferred to Li Fei's sex trade operation would have to wait for another opportunity. I had initially thought that Abu would force me to call home and beg for money again. But, for whatever reason, the bastard seemed to have changed his tune. For the next few days, he simply locked me in a cell and ignored me completely. It wasn't until the morning of the 5th day that I was taken out of my cell. These Burmese bastards first made me take a shower, then gave me a simple breakfast, and finally led me to a room that looked like a classroom. The moment I stepped inside, I had this strange feeling like I was back in my middle school classroom. Rows of old desks were neatly arranged, probably 100 or so. When I arrived, most of the desks were already occupied. I even saw a few familiar faces among them. They were the same people who were tricked into coming to Myanmar with me, my former colleagues from Bana. "Find a seat," Abu said from the podium with a smile and motioned for me to do so. Having experienced the bastard's methods firsthand, just a few days before, I knew better than anyone how much of a monster he was beneath that charming, boy-next-door facade. I lowered my head, said nothing, quickly scanned the room, and walked to the empty seat next to Xie Fangfang. I sat down obediently like the others. We'd been tricked into coming to this hellhole for about 10 days now, and each of us had experienced inhumane torture to varying degrees. You could see it in their terrified and numb expressions. Xie Fangfang had lost a lot of weight and looked gaunt, with sunken eyes and a blank stare. She didn't react at all to me sitting next to her, lost in her own thoughts. I couldn't help but sigh to myself when I thought about what she had gone through on her second day here. If I had felt a bit of self-blame and guilt for not intervening when that bastard cook dragged her away that day, that feeling was long gone. In this place, everyone was struggling just to survive. Who had time to worry about anyone else? If we're talking about terrible ends, my situation wasn't any better than Xie Fangfang's. When my toenail was ripped off and my toe was sawed off, who cared about me? Regardless, while Xie Fangfang had been violated and abused by several Burmese bastards, at least her body was still intact. I, on the other hand, was missing a toe, making me a cripple, strictly speaking. With that thought, the little guilt I had felt vanished without a trace. As more and more people were brought into the classroom, the large room was filled within minutes. "Some of you already know me, and some of you are meeting me for the first time," Abu began. "Let me introduce myself. I'm Abu, the 9th group leader of the Park's Phone and Online Information Business Department. If everything goes as planned, you will be my subordinates for the foreseeable future. Our group is different from the others. If you work hard and meet your performance goals, I guarantee you'll be safe, well-fed, and have access to power, women, and even freedom." Abu was undoubtedly a master manipulator. It was as if he knew what we were thinking. Even though I knew he was painting a picture, I couldn't help but start to fantasize. "Of course, where there are rewards, there are also punishments," Abu continued. "My group has a small assessment every 3 days and a large one every 7 days. Anyone who fails to meet their targets will suffer a rather unpleasant outcome." He smiled even more brightly at this, but his words sent a shiver down my spine. Not long ago, he'd had that same smile when he sawed off my toe. "Now, I'll take you on a tour of our group. After that, we'll have lunch, and this afternoon, training will officially begin." Following Abu, we were led down to the basement floor of the building. I'd been there before when my toenail was ripped out and my toe was sawed off. "Let's be honest, the accommodations on this floor are really not great," Abu said. "But you'll all have to start here. Anyone who meets their performance goals can move to better rooms upstairs." Abu was like a tour guide, taking us around, giving detailed and enthusiastic explanations. We toured the building from the basement all the way to the top floor. The basement was the worst, dirty, stinking, and damp, no different from a prison. The luxurious suites on the top floor were bright and clean, with private bathrooms and showers, and even pure wool carpets on the floor. They were comparable to suites in a 5-star hotel. According to that bastard Abu, if you met your goals, you could live in the luxury suites on the top floor, enjoying as much food as you wanted. There would also be a limited supply of red wine, champagne, and cigars. Not only that, but if you lived in a penthouse, you could sleep with any woman in Abu's group whose performance level was at least 2 grades lower than your own. What was even more spine-chilling was that anyone living in a penthouse could boss around and beat anyone with a lower grade, and they even got a kill right each month. If you managed to stay in a penthouse for 3 consecutive months, you'd have freedom to move around the entire park. 6 consecutive months meant 5 million yuan would be transferred into an account you designated. And if you managed to stay for a whole year, you'd be free to leave, and the park would even give you another 5 million yuan for travel expenses. Those who chose to stay would become senior partners in the park. As for what kind of rights you would enjoy as a senior partner, Abu didn't say. Despite that, I could see a strong longing in many of their eyes after we finished touring the penthouse. I knew it was a longing for a better living environment, for freedom, and for power. Not just them. My own heart was pounding in my chest with all the things that bastard Abu had said. Without even realizing it, I had a new voice in my head. Meet the goals and live in the penthouse. Chapter 15. Brutal Punishments. After the tour, Abu led us to an office on the 2nd floor. It was a large space, at least 500 square meters. Except for the necessary aisles, it was divided into small cubicles like tofu blocks. Some areas had only a landline phone on the desks, while others had computers. Without exception, most of the cubicles were occupied by people who were busily working. This is where you'll be working, Abu said with a smile. Your job is pretty simple. You just need to make phone calls or chat on the computer. He then led us into the large office. I estimated that the office was divided into 25 smaller areas, with about 20 cubicles in each area. Each area had 2 Burmese thugs with guns, constantly watching everyone within their sector. On top of that, each area also had a supervisor, an overseer, or team leader. They were like proctors during my high school exams, wearing electroshock batons on their waists and holding steel pipes in their hands, patrolling their area. Not far after we entered the telecom fraud office, we saw a Burmese thug who looked like a team leader grab a thin young man who was on a phone call. He dragged him out into the aisle and began to beat him mercilessly with a steel pipe. He stopped only when the young man was whimpering on the ground, begging for mercy. Covered in blood, the young man scrambled up and hurried back to his cubicle to continue his calls. Such a dedicated attitude. If he was in China, he could easily make a good living. Wait, Abu said, walking over to the young man. He looked at the number on the man's clothing. 9527. If I remember correctly, you didn't meet the minimum target in the last assessment and, last time, you barely met the 50,000 yuan target and you were still at the bottom of the group. Today is the last day of the week, and it seems like your sales are only at 2,000 yuan. Abu's voice was icy now. I knew this young man, 9527, was in trouble. 50,000 yuan per week was the minimum target the bastard Abu had set for us. If you met that goal, you would be a D-level employee. You could live in the dirty, smelly, and damp basement cell, and get 2 meals of porridge and steamed buns a day. The only benefit of being a D-level employee was you wouldn't be easily selected to have your kidneys harvested. If you met 100,000 yuan per week, you'd be promoted to a C-level employee. Your living arrangements would improve. You'd be moved from the basement to a simple 6-person dorm on the ground floor, and your 2 meals a day would be dry rice with meat or fish. Meeting the target of 200,000 yuan would upgrade you to a B-level employee, with corresponding improvements to your treatment. With each upgrade, the performance goal doubled. To live in the penthouse, your weekly sales would have to skyrocket to an unbelievable 1 million yuan. That was 4 million a month, almost 50 million a year. That was why those who became S-level employees and lived in the penthouse enjoyed all sorts of privileges. If they could make these Burmese bastards 1 million yuan a week through telecom fraud, of course the park would treat those S-level employees like golden geese. Hearing Abu mention his weekly performance, 9,527 didn't even bother wiping the blood off his face. He trembled and dropped to his knees with a thud. Group leader, 50,000 yuan a week is just too difficult. I dream about how to trick others into giving me money when I sleep. But, he pleaded, tears streaming down his face, desperate for Abu to show mercy. Is 50,000 a week too much? Abu asked. How do the others manage to do it then? Did I not say that if a single deal is over 100,000, you can choose to get promoted or stay at D level for another 2 weeks without an evaluation? Am I not being humane enough? I rolled my eyes inwardly at his words. At first glance, they sounded kind of humane. But was it really that easy to trick people out of 50,000 yuan a week with just a phone or a computer? I learned later that Abu's group was actually the most humane among all the telecom fraud groups in the park and consistently maintained a top 3 performance. It was said that even the big boss behind the scenes was very fond of Abu and saw him as the next telecom fraud business manager in the park. But 9527 began before being cut off by Abu. Given this, you won't meet your weekly target, and we all know what happens when you fail to meet your minimum performance for 2 consecutive weeks, right? Abu glanced at the 2 armed Burmese thugs in 9527's area. They knew their cue and came forward, grabbing the young man's arms and pinning them behind his back. Once they'd thoroughly subdued 9527, Abu turned to us, smiling. "You're all lucky. Next, I will give you a special welcome ceremony to celebrate your joining the group." With that, he took the dagger he carried with him and handed it to the closest person. "Go, cut off a piece of meat from him. Be careful, don't kill him." Looking at the dagger in his hand, the guy trembled in terror. The dagger fell to the ground with a clatter. "My group doesn't have too many rules. The only thing you need to remember is that you must listen to me, unconditionally, at any time or any place," Abu said, seemingly casually, as he bent down to pick up the dagger. As soon as he finished speaking, the bastard sliced off the guy's right ear. A blood-curdling scream instantly echoed through the entire office. "What's the use of an ear if you don't listen?" Abu said, waving the bloody ear at us with a smile. He then casually threw it on the ground and stomped on it until it was a mangled mess. The poor guy whose ear had been cut off was immediately dragged away. I knew that he was about to suffer punishments far more cruel than having his ear sliced off. "Who's next?" Abu held the dagger out to us again, and someone had set up a camera nearby. No one in their right mind would be the first to step forward. Just as that thought crossed my mind, I saw someone step forward with a sycophantic look and take the dagger from Abu. Chapter 16. With blood on my hands, can I ever go home? When one of us took the dagger from that bastard Abu and sliced off a piece of flesh from the skinny young man, I knew the law of the jungle had officially begun. Once someone had taken the lead, the rest were less fearful and under less psychological pressure. Soon, the skinny young man was covered in blood. Someone cut a chunk of flesh from his arm. Another stabbed the dagger into his thigh, and someone else cruelly sliced off one of his fingers. By the time the dagger was handed to me, the young man was curled up on the floor, barely clinging to life. I walked toward him with the blood-soaked dagger in hand. The overpowering smell of blood made my stomach churn. I almost threw up on the spot. This scene was 100 times more brutal than the pig slaughter I had witnessed as a child. I hesitated, holding the dagger over him, unsure where to start. "If you really can't bring yourself to do it, cut off a piece of your own flesh for him," Abu said from behind, as if reading my thoughts. Cut off a piece of my own flesh for him? My foot was still healing. Why would I cut into my own body for a stranger? "Sorry, man. I have no choice." I took a deep breath, saying the apology silently in my heart, and finally thrust the dagger toward him. The moment the blade pierced his arm, I felt his body convulse in agony. I'd never killed anything in my life, not even a chicken, let alone been anywhere near a kitchen. I hacked at his arm several times, but couldn't cut the flesh off. The young man passed out from the pain. The more I tried, the more clumsy I felt. Under Abu's threat and everyone's gaze, I kept stabbing and hacking, until finally managing to tear off a small piece of flesh, my hands completely covered in blood. Phew. In those 1 or 2 minutes, I was completely drenched in sweat from exhaustion, tension, and fear. I did as others had done, showed the small piece of flesh to Abu, and prepared to throw it away. However, that bastard Abu suddenly commanded me to eat the meat I was holding. This was freshly cut from someone else's body. Eating the flesh of a fellow human. Even animals wouldn't do such a thing. "I won't eat it." I threw the piece of flesh on the floor and glared at Abu with gritted teeth. To survive and escape this hellhole one day, I would endure any torture and do anything. But, first and foremost, I had to remain a human being and not turn into an animal. Eating someone else's flesh to save my own life? I'd rather die than do something so disgusting. Fine, you don't have to eat it. But this piglet is almost dead anyway. If you don't eat, then use your dagger and finish him off. I thought that Abu would punish me harshly for defying him, but he just smiled as if it was nothing. He simply offered me a new choice. Kill him? A deafening roar erupted in my head. My mind went blank. Almost instinctively, I turned to look at the young man lying in a pool of his own blood. He had miraculously opened his eyes. Even though he was barely breathing, he was still a living, breathing person. Camera ready. Be sure to capture every single detail of how 10,086 kills 9527, Abu said, seemingly wanting to make sure the cameras recorded this. The Burmese thug with the camera zoomed in. You have 10 seconds. If he's not dead in 10 seconds, I guarantee you'll be the one to die. Seeing that I stood there frozen with the dagger in my hand, Abu pulled out his gun, released the safety, and pressed the cold muzzle against my forehead. 10. What was I supposed to do? Was I really going to kill this young man? It was a life. 9. If I had blood on my hands, even if I managed to escape, what would be waiting for me back home? Prison? Or a firing squad? 8. 7. My mind was racing. I felt reverence for life, worry for the future, and an overwhelming fear. I couldn't bring myself to do it. Each of Abu's counts was like a hammer blow to my heart and nerves. I felt like I was going crazy. 3. When the countdown got to 3, my mind went completely blank. In my dazed, unconscious state, my survival instinct took over. When that animal Abu said, 1, I stabbed the dagger deep into the young man's heart. At the instant the dagger pierced his heart, the gap between us was so close. I could clearly hear his faint breath, the slow, weak beats of his heart. Just as his eyelids drooped, I thought I saw a look of relief and gratitude in his eyes. Perhaps it was just my imagination, a way to comfort myself. I don't know how I pulled the dagger out or how I got out of the office. Like a zombie, I joined the others and finished the so-called tour Abu had planned. We ended up in the cafeteria. I vaguely remember that we had meat buns for lunch that day. I couldn't remember what kind of filling they had. I ate and ate and ate until I was so stuffed, I threw up. I threw up not only the meat buns, but also the porridge and steamed buns from breakfast and the leftovers from last night. Later, Xia Fongfong told me that I was throwing up so violently it seemed like I was trying to vomit out my heart as payment to the young man I had killed. After that fit of throwing up, my soul finally returned to my body. I don't know how to describe the feeling. It was as if my soul had gone to see the young man off to the afterlife. It was from that day that I never ate a meat bun again. I couldn't even stand the smell. What surprised me was that no one complained or blamed me when I threw up in the cafeteria. In fact, many people began to look away from me, as if they were afraid of me. After some time, I understood that they were afraid of me. No matter the reason, my hands were stained with human blood now. Before, I had been desperate to escape, go home, see my parents, and return to the land where I was born and raised. But could I even go back now? As I washed the dishes after the meal, scrubbing my hands frantically, I fell into a deep contemplation. What would be waiting for me back home? At that moment, I had no idea that when I did manage to escape this hell on earth, the number of lives on my conscience would be far more than one. Chapter 17. The Psychology of Telecom Fraud. The doors to a new world open. In a situation where you've never met the other person, how do you get them to transfer money? It all comes down to the human heart. And what's in the human heart? Greed, lust, fear, terror, anxiety. After lunch, I sat in the corner of the classroom, along with everyone else, for our lessons. The Burmese bastard on the podium was wearing a white shirt, with gold-rimmed glasses and his hair neatly combed. Watching him speak so eloquently, the words, "a wolf in sheep's clothing," flashed through my mind. If I had seen him on the street, I would have probably thought he was a college professor. In fact, the 40-something-year-old man had indeed been a psychology professor in their country. Of course, the subject he taught now was also psychology. The psychology of telecom fraud. I sat in the corner like a model student, listening with rapt attention. If I had been this studious in school, I might not have gotten into Peking or Tsinghua University, but at least I could have gone to a 985 or 211 level school. Back then, I studied for my future. Now, I studied to survive. After I stabbed that skinny young man's heart, I fully understood the reality. In this place ruled by the law of the jungle, everything, from a life to a steamed bun, had to be earned or stolen. It was like a group of people who encountered a wolf in the wilderness. You didn't run to outrun the wolf, but to outrun the people around you. Now that I was determined to find a way to escape this hellhole, I had to be better than most people at everything I did. Even if it meant scraping by, I would do my best to live. That poor soul who had been mutilated and then killed by me was a living example. The entire afternoon lesson was tedious. The wolf in sheep's clothing talked quickly, covering at least a semester's worth of college material in just an afternoon. Many of us were dozing off. I observed and noticed that only a few smart ones, like me, were actively trying to absorb every bit of information the Burmese professor was teaching. This intense learning lasted for 3 days. The afternoon of the first day and the whole second day were spent studying the psychology of telecom fraud, the analysis of cases involving different groups of people and scenarios, and how to apply it all. The third day was spent learning the standard telecom fraud schemes and scripts. To my surprise, the person who taught the schemes and scripts was none other than Abu, that bastard. Before being tricked into coming to Myanmar, I had always thought that telecom fraud was just a matter of making calls, while pretending to be a banker or government official. After completing those 3 days of intense training, I began to realize that telecom fraud was actually a professional and advanced science, almost like an art. A new world was slowly opening in front of me. At the end of the last day, after the telecom fraud schemes and scripts lesson, Abu stood on the podium, closed his textbook, and flashed his signature. Boy next door smile. Congratulations everyone for completing the business course. To test what you've learned, I will be arranging a graduation exam tomorrow. I felt my heart sink when I heard that. That was the style of that bastard Abu. Abu scanned the crowd and continued with a wider smile. Tomorrow's graduation exam will be simple. You just need to complete one successful transaction within a day to officially graduate and become a formal business employee. If your transaction reaches 5,000 yuan or above, you will be immediately promoted to a C-level employee. If your transaction reaches 20,000 yuan or above, you will be directly promoted to a B-level employee. If anyone manages to make over 100,000 in sales in the graduation exam tomorrow, I'll reward them with a week of S-level elite employee benefits. A few excited gasps echoed below the podium. After 3 days of training, many had forgotten that they had been tricked into coming to Myanmar and had completely adjusted to their piglet identities. A large number of them were even starting to immerse themselves in the animalistic world that those bastards had created. When they heard that making 100,000 yuan would result in an instant promotion to the S level and access to penthouse suites, good food, drinks, and any woman they wanted, some people became very restless. To be honest, I had to admit that deep down, I was a bit hopeful too. No one is naturally a pushover who would enjoy living in a dirty, stinking cell full of rats and cockroaches, eating food even dogs wouldn't touch. Without even realizing it, through the constant emphasis and guidance from those bastards, my mindset and values were starting to twist. I was slowly sinking into the world that the park had created for us piglets. Sometime later, I had an epiphany, and a cold sweat broke out. That was when I truly realized how terrifying this telecom fraud park really was. We piglets who had been tricked into the park had been trapped in their meticulously created world of the law of the jungle from the moment we had stepped foot inside. In that world, those Burmese bastards were the masters. No, to be more precise, the big boss behind the park was the true master of that world. Even those Burmese bastards like Abu were probably unaware that they had also been immersed in that world. But that was a story for later. I had yet to realize this. Even if I had, what could I do? I could only grit my teeth and try my best to survive in the animalistic world created by the park. That was the human heart. Abu was clearly satisfied with the reactions below him. He encouraged us a few times and then changed the topic. Of course, tomorrow's graduation exam is also a form of screening. Those who do not pass the test will be eliminated. We have no room for deadweight in our group. I think all of you know, more or less, about the consequences of failing the test. In theory, those who do not pass the test will have all their organs removed, all of their blood drained, and their bodies will be used to make fertilizer. But I will give you all one last chance. If anyone who fails the test can have their family send money to buy their life back, they can also qualify to become a formal business employee in my group. Damn it. At that moment, it finally dawned on me why that bastard had never asked me to contact my family and ask for money after he had brought me out of the water prison. He had been waiting for this moment. Before, my family sending money was about saving my life. Now, it was just to become a formal telecom fraud employee. How ironic. Chapter 18. 2 legs dangling in front of me. I had no doubt about what that bastard Abu had said. If anyone failed the exam tomorrow and their families were unwilling to pay to buy their lives back, their fates wouldn't be pretty. After spending time with the monster, I knew he was capable of anything. I thought everyone would be terrified when he mentioned the consequences of failing the exam. But, as it turned out, after a few days of psychological indoctrination and brainwashing, While some were afraid, a small number of them not only weren't afraid, they were actually eager. It had only been a few days, yet they had changed so much. I couldn't help but think about the scene where Abu forced us to cut flesh from the skinny young man who hadn't met his target. As we lined up to carve pieces of flesh from the young man, the others in the office didn't seem to pay much attention. Some were on the phone, others on their computers. Most continued what they were doing. Even when I was forced to plunge a blood-soaked dagger into the young man's heart, very few people even looked our way. Human life seemed to be worth less than the phone calls they were making. The reactions of my companions now mirrored that scene in the office. I wondered what would happen to them if they were lucky enough to be rescued and returned to the real world. Once he finished discussing the exam, the 3-day telecom fraud training came to a temporary end. Whether it was to reward our successful graduation or encourage us to perform well on the exam, Abu and his thugs surprisingly provided white rice and a large basin of twice-cooked pork for dinner. Not counting the meat cut off the skinny young man, this was only the 3rd time that I had seen meat in my time here. The first time was the day before I asked my family for 200,000 yuan ransom. The second time was 3 days ago with those meat buns. The last was tonight's twice-cooked pork. The large basin of pork made my mouth water, and the others cheered with excitement. Everyone attacked the basin as if they had been reborn as starving ghosts. Although I knew it looked like a bunch of pigs fighting for food, I still rushed to the basin as quickly as I could for the sake of the meat. Making sure my body had the necessary nutrition was essential for my future survival. If you don't eat enough, not only would you become weak, your mind would also become dull. Men had a natural advantage when it came to grabbing meat. I managed to grab half a bowl of pork, piled high with 2 large scoops of rice, and found a corner to eat. Just a few bites in, Xie Fongfong walked over and sat down next to me with half a bowl of rice. Ever since I had sat next to her in class for the first time, the girl seemed to have developed a habit. Whether it was during class, meals, or even sleeping in the cell, she always stayed close to me. In our limited free space, that bastard Abu didn't interfere with us. He didn't care about who sat next to who or slept with who. It was as if he didn't even acknowledge the concept of men and women not living together. It was clearly something that bastard Abu had planned deliberately. It was as if a master would care whether male and female pigs were in the same pen. My mouth still full, I glanced at Xie Fongfong's bowl and hesitated before asking, "Didn't get any meat?" Xie Fongfong nodded blankly, picking at the grains of rice with no rhyme or reason. I had no idea what she was thinking. "Eat this," I said. I picked a few pieces of pork from my bowl for her and continued to eat. Although it wasn't anyone's fault that she was dragged away and abused by those Burmese thugs in front of us, we were all too afraid to intervene. Even though I had long lost all my guilt over that incident, I was still willing to help her when possible because we were from the same province and it didn't cost me anything. Xie Fongfong looked at the pork I had given her, a glimmer of light finally returning to her eyes. After eating the last piece of meat slowly, she stared into the distance and said softly, "Do you think we can go home one day?" It was the first time I had heard her speak in days. Since that time she was taken and abused, Xie Fongfong had become like a mute. Hearing her sudden question, I paused my eating and said, hesitating, "If we don't give up, I believe we'll go home one day." As if she hadn't heard my reply, Xie Fongfong just stared ahead, clutching her chopsticks tightly. After I finished eating every single grain of rice and let out a satisfied burp, she spoke. Again, like she was talking to herself, "What if we do get back?" Her voice was soft. I only vaguely heard the words, "get back." When I asked her what she had said, she stopped talking again. After these past few days, I realized that the abuse she had suffered had affected her mental state, making her somewhat abnormal. You could see it in her unfocused gaze. Since I was already used to her odd behavior, I hadn't thought much about the question she had asked me while we were eating. Sharing a few pieces of pork with her was the most I was willing to do. After dinner, we were all herded back to the basement cells, as usual. When we went to sleep, Xie Fongfong curled up next to me again. I was exhausted from the past 3 days of intense training, and I knew that if we failed our exams tomorrow, we'd be harvested. So I had to rest early and be prepared for tomorrow. In my half-asleep state, I was suddenly jolted awake by a terrifying shriek. Before I could even understand what was happening, I instinctively jumped up. It was dark in the basement cell. As soon as I was up, someone kicked me. I cursed out loud, but instinctively moved away and realized it wasn't a kick. It was a woman's legs dangling there, and it was me who had bumped into them. I looked up, following the swaying legs, and saw Xie Fongfong's pale face in the dim light. Chapter 19. Xie Fongfong is dead. The telecom fraud exam begins. Xie Fongfong was dead. She had used her pants to hang herself from the doorframe of the cell. Looking at her pale legs dangling in front of me, I was terrified, even though I was much stronger now mentally. The woman who had been sleeping next to me had killed herself. How could anyone not be affected by that? Stop just standing there. Help me get her down, I said after I sat down and rested for a bit. I wanted to ask the people in the cell to help me get Xie Fongfong down, but no one paid any attention to me. Some were standing, some were sitting, leaning against the wall with their arms crossed, watching me with cold eyes. Looking at their indifferent faces, I felt a burst of anger, a desperate urge to curse at them. She was our companion. She was still a living person last night. But I swallowed my words. In this hellhole, no one could even guarantee that they would live to see the next day. Who cared about anyone else? Since no one was willing to help, I braced myself and pulled Xie Fongfong's legs and managed to gently get her down. Her face was terrifying. Even after I got her down, her eyes were still bulging out of their sockets, and her tongue was hanging out. She had also soiled herself. It was obvious that she had lost control of her bowels before she died. Her body wasn't just scary. She stank as well. Trying not to look at her face, I looked for something to clean her with and found a couple pieces of clothes, probably left behind by someone. I used them to wipe the waste off of her legs. Even though she was still smelly, it was much better than before. If only I had clean water to wash her. Of course, that was just wishful thinking. We didn't have clean water where we lived, and there weren't even toilets. Everyone had to eat, sleep, and relieve themselves. In the cell, those Burmese bastards in the park would rather have people clean the cells regularly than install a toilet. They really treated us like pigs in a pen. After cleaning her body as best as I could, I took her pants, which were still tied to the door frame, and after some struggle, I managed to put them on her. She must have killed herself during the second half of the night because her body wasn't fully stiff yet. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to put her pants on. I laid her down and roughly fixed her hair. I was exhausted and sat down next to her. I stared at her body and the doorframe that was barely 5 feet tall, wondering how she managed to hang herself. To kill yourself using your pants in a place that is not even as high as a person, it would have taken so much courage. It's better for her, at least she's free, I whispered, silently sighing. I even felt a bit jealous of her. At least she didn't have to be afraid of being beaten or worried about what would happen to her if she failed the exam. She wouldn't have to be afraid of having her organs harvested or of becoming fertilizer. The first few days here, I had also thought about ending it all. I guess that Xie Fongfong had stopped wanting to live after the Burmese thugs abused her. With the telecom fraud exam being scheduled for today, people who didn't pass would face a terrible fate, and their families would have to pay for their lives. She probably knew that she wouldn't pass and didn't want to have her organs harvested, and she didn't want to burden her family. That was probably why she chose to end her life in such a cruel way. I thought that her suicide would cause a stir in the park, but it turned out that her death was like a pebble thrown into a mud puddle. It didn't even make a ripple. When the Burmese thugs found out, they just dragged her out like a dead dog. I didn't know where they took her body. Maybe they threw it in a remote location for wolves to eat, or buried it in a pit, or maybe they would use it as fertilizer. Whatever happened, Xie Fongfong was completely gone from my life the moment her body was dragged out. Xie Fongfong's suicide wasn't even considered a small incident among us piglets. When it was time to eat, we were let out for breakfast. Then, the telecom fraud graduation exam officially began. That bastard Abu didn't even mention her suicide once. With the exam starting, I had to force myself to forget about her death and focus on the telecom fraud exam. We all had only one task: to use the phone to persuade the people on the list provided by the Burmese thugs to send money. Everyone had a list of 50 names. The information was basic: name, age, address, phone number, and some information about their immediate family. The names on your list are all good resources. You just need to use what you've learned over the past few days, and you will definitely get a successful transaction, Abu said. The exam will last from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. If you pass, you'll be promoted and will no longer live in the basement cells, and will have good food and drink. If you fail, you'll be harvested and made into fertilizer. I think you know what you have to do. Begin. As soon as Abu said those words, many people grabbed their phones and frantically started to make calls. Of course, there were some smart people like me who didn't rush into making phone calls. Instead, they first analyzed their lists. The first lesson in telecom fraud psychology was that if you want to get someone to transfer money, you need to use their heart. What's in a human heart? Greed, lust, fear, terror, anxiety. If the person you're calling is an elderly person and you tell them they won millions of dollars, do you think they would believe you? But what? If you told them that their son who was working away from home had been in an accident and was in hospital, wouldn't that make them anxious? You need to tap into the greed, lust, fear, terror, and anxiety that's inside everyone. That was the first step to success in telecom fraud. I spent about an hour analyzing my list. I crossed out the names of those I thought would be least likely to work and marked elderly people, pregnant women, workers, and those from rural areas. After I did that, only 17 names were left on my list. And from those 17 people, I was going to try to complete my first telecom fraud. Chapter 20. This is telecom fraud with your life on the line. I was quite confident before I started making fraud calls. After all, I had paid more attention in class than most of the others. But after making 13 calls, reality gave me a harsh blow. 5 people hung up, 3 people cursed at me, and 4 people were skeptical. Of the remaining 2 people, one directly called me out as a fraud, and the other seemed to be swayed by my words, but didn't actually transfer any money. I forced myself to remain calm and mark the results of the last call. If I can't trick the last 4, I'll have to think of other ways, I said to myself, staring at the last 4 names on my list. I had no confidence. If I still couldn't make it work with those 4, I would have to go back and target those who I had marked with special symbols. It wasn't that my conscience was non-existent and I was targeting the elderly, pregnant women, and rural workers, but that I had no choice. If they were tricked, they would probably just cry. If I failed the exam, I would be harvested. I could only push the elderly and pregnant women until the end of my list. It was the most I was willing to do. Just as I picked up the phone to make my next call, a scream echoed from the cubicle to my left. It startled me so much that I pressed the wrong number. What was going on? I instinctively stopped dialing and turned to look. A Burmese thug was hitting a fellow student with a metal rod. The one who was being beaten was about my age. He wore glasses and was quiet, and I couldn't remember his name. I think you're tired of living. You dare call the police on the sly? The Burmese thug shouted at the glasses-wearing young man. He raised the rod and brought it down again, splitting the young man's head open. He lay on the ground without moving. It was obvious that the Burmese thug was very angry and was beating him with the intent to kill. Just as I thought the young man had been killed, the Burmese thug raised the rod again and hit the young man's right hand. I could hear the clear snap of the bones, even from 3 cubicles away. At the same time, the young man screamed in pain. Please don't hit me anymore. I'm begging you, please. I was wrong. I won't ever do it again. The young man, his face covered in blood, hugged his broken hand, no longer able to endure the pain. He tried to ask for forgiveness. Seeing this, I couldn't help but sigh. Before I was locked up in the water prison, I would have also tried to call the police or contact my family. But submitting and asking for forgiveness after being beaten was the way we had to live as piglets. In this place, heroes didn't last long. Do you think saying you're sorry is enough? The thug asked, his eyes flashing with malice. He randomly pointed at 3 people. You, and you. You hold him down. I was shocked. The third person that the thug pointed at was me. I cursed to myself, knowing that I had no choice but to step forward. I didn't know what the thug would do, but I knew that the young man would suffer terribly. Under the thug's orders, I forcefully held down the young man's right leg, while the other 2 held down his left leg and left arm. The Burmese thug crouched down in front of him and asked, "Which hand did you use to call the police?" The young man was trembling like a leaf. He was completely terrified. "Are you going to talk?" The Burmese thug raised the metal rod. The young man flinched and said, left hand. I glanced at the young man's broken right hand and cursed him for being such an idiot. Now that his right hand was broken, why didn't he just say that he had used his right hand? Even though I was panicking for him, I didn't dare show any emotion and only held his right leg. I could guess what the Burmese thug was going to do. As expected, he told the person holding the young man's left hand to spread his fingers, and then told another Burmese thug to bring over a hammer. "I should cut off your whole hand, but since you will probably use it again to make money for the park, I'll be merciful and just break 3 of your fingers. I'll leave the index and thumb for now." As soon as the thug finished speaking, he slammed the hammer down on the young man's pinky finger. "Ah!" The young man screamed in pain and began to struggle violently. It took the three of us a lot of effort to keep him down. The pain of broken fingers was horrible. I knew that better than anyone else. Compared to me, the young man was relatively lucky. The thug was cruel and was a real animal, but he wasn't even close to that bastard Abu. Breaking a finger with a hammer is painful for only a second. When Abu used a small saw to cut off my toe, it went on for several minutes. 2 more. The Burmese thug wiped the blood off the hammer on the young man's clothes, showed his dark, yellow teeth, and admired his work. Then, he brought the hammer down on the young man's ring finger. I actually felt relieved for the young man, and for the person holding his left hand. At least, the Burmese thug was somewhat accurate, or else their hands would have been crushed. After all 3 fingers were smashed into a pulp, the thug with the hammer was about to have him dragged back to the cell, but Abu stopped him. Abu had someone wake him up and had a doctor clean the wounds. Once he was cleaned up, Abu smiled and asked, "Do you want to be dragged out to have your organs harvested?" The young man instinctively shook his head. "Good, if you don't want that, then continue with the exam. If you pass, I'll have the doctors treat your injuries." With that, and with the compassionate care of that bastard Abu, the young man with the broken head, a fractured right hand, and 3 crushed fingers continued the telecom fraud exam by wrapping the phone receiver around his head and using his 2 remaining fingers to dial numbers. Even after so many years, the image of that young man with the phone receiver wrapped around his head and using only 2 fingers to dial a number is still very vivid. This was telecom fraud with their lives on the line. Chapter 21. Successfully completing the assessment, a disaster descends. As time ticked by, I had gone through the entire first batch of names they provided, and not a single one fell for the scam. My anxiety grew with each passing moment. With no other choice, I hardened my heart and refocused on the elderly, pregnant women, and rural migrant workers that I had previously marked. The money they possessed could be their retirement savings or their children's college funds. But what could I do? Was I supposed to refrain from scamming these people and wait to have my kidneys harvested, blood drained, and my corpse turned into fertilizer by those Burmese bastards? No, I couldn't do it. I was just an ordinary person, not that noble, because I simply had no choice. I silently apologized to the remaining names on my list and gritted my teeth, dialing the number of the first name on the list, an old man. "Hello, is this Zhang Guangshou? This is the Second People's Hospital of Guangqing. Your son, Zhang Tao, has been in a car accident and is being treated at our hospital. We need a family member to pay for the surgery." The moment the call connected, I started reciting the scam script that I had learned in the past few days. Hearing the old man's worried and anxious tone, my heart was filled with guilt. But what did it matter? Compared to guilt, I was more afraid of having my kidneys harvested and being bled dry. I didn't know if I was lucky or not. This scam call was very successful. The old man, Zhang Guangshou, was completely taken in and immediately agreed to go to the nearest bank to transfer the money as quickly as possible, urging us to save his son at any cost. After hanging up, I immediately called Zhang Tao, the old man's son, and pretended to be a client for about 15 minutes. The purpose of chatting with him for so long was to keep his phone line busy, preventing the old man from getting through and exposing the scam. After finishing the call with Zhang Tao, I continued to impersonate a staff member at the Second People's Hospital of Guangqing, calling to urge old man Zhang Guangshou. This was to minimize the chances of him contacting Zhang Tao and to intensify his sense of urgency. In this manner, I constantly switched roles, acting as a hospital staff member and a client, repeatedly calling the old man and his son, doing everything I could to prevent them from contacting each other. More than 40 minutes later, when a 30,000 yuan surgery fee was credited to my account, I finally breathed a sigh of relief. I never thought that the first successful scam I'd ever commit would amount to a full 30,000 yuan. Keep in mind that was a huge amount of money over 10 years ago. This money was likely the old man's life savings. The irony was that, while they painstakingly accumulated their lifetime savings, I had swindled them out of it with just a few phone calls. After hanging up, my mood was incredibly complex. I was both happy and disturbed, both relieved and guilty. What was worth celebrating and feeling relieved about was that, with this money credited to the account, I had finally successfully completed the assessment and wouldn't have my kidneys harvested and blood drained. Furthermore, according to the standards set by that bastard Abu, as long as you completed 20,000 or more in earnings on the day of the assessment, you could be promoted directly to a Level B operator. Not only would I be moved from the basement dungeon to a 3-person room on the 2nd floor, but I would also be able to eat white rice and meat dishes every day for the next week and have a hot shower. In addition to the vast improvement in living conditions, I would also receive a pack of cigarettes and a bottle of alcohol every week. Cigarettes and alcohol were genuine rarities in this hellish place. Many people never saw them from the time they entered the compound until they died. What was disturbing and made me feel guilty was that when the old man and his son found out they had been scammed, they would surely be furious and might even do something drastic. Especially the old man. He might even take his own life because of this. But what was done. I couldn't do anything now. I could only silently hope that those two could think things through. Previously, my mind was only focused on making scam calls, purely for self-preservation. Now that I had completed the assessment, I no longer needed to scam more people. As for getting 100,000 yuan on the assessment day and moving to the top floor suite, experiencing the benefits of a level S operator, I never even considered it. Being able to move from the dirty, smelly dungeon in the basement to a 3-person room on the second floor was already a pleasant surprise. I wasn't actually brainwashed by Abu and those Burmese bastards, wanting to climb to the top and become a level S ace operator. What I truly wanted was simply to escape this hellish place alive, not to reign supreme in this human hell where the law of the jungle was in full effect. But I never imagined that in the following days, even though I never thought of fighting my way up in the compound, where the law of the jungle prevailed, I would be forced to try my best to stand at the top of the food chain, for no other reason than to survive. After successfully scamming the 30,000 yuan, I continued making calls, holding the phone to my ear, just to avoid too much attention from the Burmese bastards. But I was just going through the motions, pretending to make calls to appease them, and had no real intention of scamming anyone. Just when I thought the assessment would pass without any problems, something unexpected happened around 4 p.m. Some guy, whether it was dumb luck or something else, had scammed 118,000 yuan in a single transaction. After confirming that the other party had really transferred the money, the guy was so happy he nearly went mad, jumping around the office like a crazed monkey, shouting and laughing. Even Abu was alarmed by this incident and came to praise him in person, even giving him a pack of cigarettes as a reward. Having received Abu's reward, the guy was red in the face, holding up the pack of cigarettes as proudly as an athlete who had won a medal at the Olympics. Seeing this ridiculous scene, I rolled my eyes, feeling a sense of both amusement and sadness. I never thought someone would be so completely brainwashed so soon. However, that simple eye roll resulted in my suffering an unprovoked disaster. Seeing me roll my eyes, that guy rushed over and pointed a finger at me, yelling, "What was that look just now? You unconvinced or jealous?" Unconvinced? Jealous? I'd have to be crazy to be jealous of that pack of cigarettes that only sells for 7.5 yuan back home. I didn't say a word and just frowned, not wanting to argue with this lunatic. But the less I wanted to argue with him, the more energetic the guy became, jabbing a finger onto my forehead and sneering, "I remember you. Don't think that because your hands are stained with blood, I'll be afraid of you." My mind was a little confused. What the hell was he talking about? After saying this, the guy turned his head and fawned up to Abu, smiling ingratiatingly as he asked, "Team Leader Abu, I remember you said that if someone completes 100,000 yuan in earnings on the assessment day, they would be promoted directly to a level S ace operator, right?" Abu glanced at him meaningfully and nodded with a bright smile. "That's correct. You will temporarily enjoy the treatment of a level S ace operator. For a week, you can live in the top floor suite, eat and drink to your heart's content, and even have good cigarettes and alcohol for the next week." "Thank you, Team Leader Abu." Having received Abu's confirmation, the guy proudly raised his chin and then asked, "Can I sleep with any woman I want this week? And can I order around or beat up anyone who is of a lower rank than me?" While saying order around or beat up anyone, he also intentionally looked at me a couple of times. Chapter 22. To avoid being tortured to death, I can only continue with the scam. My heart skipped a beat, and I knew I was in trouble. Sure enough, the bastard Abu looked at me with an even thicker smile and told that guy, "In theory, only a formal level S ace operator can enjoy the treatment you just mentioned. However, since you are the first in this batch to complete 100,000 yuan in earnings, I can give you some of the privileges of a formal level S ace operator. For the next week, you can choose one woman who is no higher than level B from among the same batch of trainees, and you can also choose 2 people of no higher than level B to order around during non-working hours. Of course, on the condition that you do not cause them death or permanent disability." Son of a bitch. My rank just happened to be at level B. In other words, according to the rules set by the bastard Abu, the guy who had completed 100,000 yuan could order me around and beat me up for the next week. Hee hee, thank you, Team Leader Abu. That guy's eyes were beaming with excitement, and he arrogantly walked up to me again, raising his hand to slap me in the face. It was one thing to be insulted and beaten by the Burmese bastards, but now even my fellow countrymen were being brainwashed and turned crazy. The days ahead were going to be even more difficult. It was just like when the Japanese invaded China. The Japanese were, of course, despicable, but the traitors who betrayed their own country should be even more reviled. Compared to the Japanese, some of the traitors were even more vicious and cruel. Just as the slap was about to hit my face, I reacted quickly and took a step back, dodging the blow and kicking that guy hard in the stomach. 059, don't act like a dog that's gained power by leaning on your master. I'm warning you, you better not provoke me, or I'll kill you. I glanced at the number on the guy's chest, deliberately putting on a fierce appearance, glaring at him with gritted teeth. Under the law of the jungle, if I chickened out and let him beat me now, the days ahead would likely become more and more difficult. I might even be killed by these brainwashed compatriots before those Burmese bastards could finish me off. Team leader Abu, he actually dared to retaliate. 059 climbed up, clutching his stomach with a painful expression, and went to Abu to complain with a look of fear and grievance. His appearance was exactly like a dog that had gone home to complain to its master after being beaten outside. Before the bastard Abu could speak, I quickly stepped in and said, "There is still more than an hour left before the end of the assessment, and everyone's rank has not yet been finalized. Maybe I can complete 1 or 2 more deals during this last period." Upon hearing my words, Abu nodded in agreement and said, "That's true. 059, your reward will only take effect after the assessment has ended, okay?" After a pause, the bastard Abu scanned everyone and then encouraged them, saying loudly, "Everyone, if you want to live a better life for the next week and not be enslaved by others, do your best to increase your ranking with your performance in the last hour or so. All right, everyone, keep up the good work." After saying that, Abu put his hands in his pockets and hummed a little tune as he left the office. It was clear that the bastard was in a very good mood. I've remembered that kick from earlier. I don't believe you can rise to a level A operator in the last hour. I am the newcomer king in this batch. You are nowhere near enough to compete with me. Wait until after the assessment and see how I deal with you. 059, with his teeth bared, clutched the place where I had just kicked him, threatening me with a cold smile as he returned to his position, his small, rat-like eyes beginning to wander freely over the women. What kind of mess is this? I cursed under my breath, my face darkening as I returned to my station. Unsurprisingly, I had been thoroughly targeted by 059. What I couldn't understand was why this guy was targeting me. Was it because that day, I had been forced by the bastard Abu to stab the heart of that skinny young man who barely had any life left in him? If I didn't reach level A in the last hour, God only knew what 059, that bastard, would do to me in the next week. Abu had only said that they could not cause death or permanent disability. But the concept was actually quite broad. If 059, that bastard, forced me to eat shit and drink urine, it wouldn't exceed the rule of no death or permanent disability. No, I absolutely cannot allow that bastard to order me around for a week. I gritted my teeth, picked up the phone, and looked at the list in my hand seriously. On the surface, it seemed that if I didn't manage to become a temporary level A operator, I would be ordered around by that bastard 059 for a week. The reality was that it was far more complicated than that, because the performance standards for the assessment in a week would be 10 times higher than today. The standard performance for a level D operator every week is 50,000 yuan, not to mention level C and level B, or even higher level A and level S. If I was truly targeted by that bastard 059 and was forced to eat shit and drink urine every day, or got slapped every now and then, who would have the mood to scam people? If I failed to complete the task next week, God only knew what methods those Burmese bastards would use to punish me. The ending of that skinny young man 3 days ago still made my scalp crawl whenever I thought about it. I didn't want to be tortured to death piece by piece. You should blame that bastard 059. I'm being forced into this. Looking at the remaining names on the list, I sighed inwardly and once again started the scam, giving it my all. I don't know if it was because I was lucky or if I really had a talent for scamming. Before the assessment officially ended, I made 15 calls and successfully scammed 3 people, earning a total of 22,000 yuan. Adding the 30,000 yuan I had scammed from the old man Zhang Guangshou initially, my total performance for the day was 52,000 yuan, just barely exceeding the standard for a temporary level A operator. After confirming that the last sum of money had arrived, I finally breathed a sigh of relief. It had just passed 6 o'clock when the bastard Abu walked in on time, and announced the end of the assessment. I had barely stood up from my chair when the bastard 059 had already rushed over impatiently, raising his hand to hit me. "You forget everything, don't you?" At the crucial moment, I grabbed his wrist and slapped him twice across the face with force. I already held a grudge against the bastard in my heart, and naturally, I didn't hold back. The slaps were so hard that his nose immediately started bleeding. If it wasn't for worrying about those Burmese bastards, I really would have broken his nose with a punch. Wu Dazhuang, He Yao, Qian Lily, these 2 slaps are to vent your frustrations. Seeing 059's bloody face and miserable state, I couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Wu Dazhuang, He Yao, and Qian Lily were the 3 that I had scammed during the last push. If it wasn't for the insistence of that bastard 059, I wouldn't have even considered continuing the scam, and they wouldn't have lost so much money. Of course, I admitted that I was selfish. If I had been willing to be tortured to death, they wouldn't have been scammed. But when faced with life or death situations, how many people can truly be selfless? Chapter 23. The First Rank Division, The Law of the Jungle begins. My 2 slaps, done in anger, had completely stunned 059. The guy was dumbfounded for a few seconds, with blood streaming down his nose, before he started wailing and went to Abu to complain. "Team leader Abu, you personally said that operators who are 2 ranks higher can freely order around and beat lower-ranked operators during non-working hours. That dog, 086, actually dared to retaliate. He is clearly challenging your authority. Team leader Abu, you must avenge me." 059's state, with tears and blood running down his face, was like a dog that had been beaten outside and went home to complain to its master. I felt even more disgusted by this guy. My assessment performance had exceeded 50,000 yuan, so I wasn't worried that 059 would cause any problems. Since the bastard Abu wanted to implement the law of the jungle among us, he would never go back on his word publicly and intentionally find excuses to mess with me. Even though they were all inhumane Burmese beasts, once they started going back on their word, all of their hard work on brainwashing us would have been in vain. Sure enough, the bastard Abu did not immediately stand up for 059. Instead, he beckoned to the Burmese bastard in charge of supervising the assessment and inquired about my assessment performance. When he found out that I had actually completed over 20,000 yuan worth of business in the last hour, a hint of surprise flashed in his eyes. He smiled approvingly at me and then turned to look at 059, saying, "You heard it too. 086's performance exceeded 50,000 yuan, and he is already a temporary level A operator, only 1 level lower than you. Therefore, you will not be able to order him around or beat him up for the next week. If your performance next week exceeds his by 2 levels, then 086 will be at your disposal." After a brief explanation, Abu smiled and patted 059 on the shoulder, encouraging him, "Keep going. I believe you can do it." Although he was very unwilling, 059 didn't dare to disobey the words of the bastard Abu and could only glare at me with a menacing look, casually wiped the blood from his face, and then looked at Abu with a fawning expression again. "Team leader Abu, what you said earlier about me being able to choose a woman and 2 low-level operators to order around?" As he was speaking, 059's small, rat-like eyes were fixed on a fair-skinned, plump, young woman with short hair, indicating he had already made up his mind. "Don't worry, of course I'll keep my word." Abu gestured for him to be patient, and then took a newly compiled form from a Burmese bastard next to him. "Everyone, the results of today's assessment have been completely compiled. A total of 58 people participated in the assessment. 1 person has an earnings of over 100,000 yuan. 1 person has an earnings of over 50,000 yuan. 4 people have an earnings of over 20,000 yuan. 9 people have an earnings of over 5,000 yuan. 33 people have earnings of less than 5,000 yuan. And 10 people have no earnings at all." After reading the assessment results, the bastard Abu's face didn't change at all. He still had that warm smile that made him look like the boy next door. Even though he was pretending very well, I could still sense his dissatisfaction and bloodthirst in his eyes. My own assessment performance was actually the second best among my peers, which was quite surprising. Of course, being able to complete the assessment with the second best performance and enjoying the treatment of a level A operator for the next week was all thanks to the pressure exerted by that bastard 059. First, congratulations to those trainees who have completed their assessment earnings. From now on, you are all official operators of Group 9, and you can enjoy the corresponding treatment of your respective ranks. Then the bastard Abu's tone suddenly changed, his smile became thicker, and his voice even more menacing as he continued. As for the remaining 10 people who have failed the assessment, you have two paths to choose from. One is to call home and get 50,000 yuan to make up for your earnings, and the other is to have your kidneys harvested, blood drained, and your corpse made into fertilizer. With a simple gesture from Abu, a Burmese bastard immediately rushed over and dragged out the 10 unlucky bastards who had failed the assessment. You have 1 minute to think. Whether you live or die is all up to you. The 10 people were forced to kneel in a row with black gun barrels pointed at their heads. Everyone was pale and trembling like a leaf. I watched this scene from the crowd, feeling like a stone was weighing on my heart. If I hadn't been lucky, I'd likely be kneeling in front, with a gun pointed at my head as well. The bastard Abu made it sound nice, that whether they lived or died was up to them. At the end of the day, it was just another way to try and make money. After all, how many people would willingly have their kidneys harvested, blood drained, and their corpses used as fertilizer? I don't want to be harvested for parts. Please spare me. Tomorrow? No. I'll call my family right away. I don't want to die either. I'm done for. When I first entered the compound, my parents already sold the house to redeem me. This time, they certainly won't be able to come up with this much money. Just as I had guessed, no one was actually willing to have their kidneys harvested and blood drained. The 10 unlucky bastards who failed the assessment were begging for mercy one after another. Abu was clearly satisfied with the result. He waved his hand and had them taken away. As for how many families would come up with 50,000 yuan, or would be willing to transfer the money, I had no idea. However, after this, a few of these 10 people were never seen again. I was afraid to confirm whether those who disappeared were harvested for parts, had their blood drained, and their bodies made into fertilizer. But I thought that even if those people weren't dead, their fate certainly wasn't going to be good either. All right, everyone has worked hard for so long. Now it is time for you to collect your rewards. After the 10 unlucky bastards who had failed the assessment were taken away, Abu clapped his hands to draw everyone's attention back, asking us to stand in 5 different areas, according to our operator rank. This way, everyone's rank would be clear at a glance. 059, as the only outstanding operator with a performance exceeding 100,000 yuan in this assessment, you can now exercise your rights. Abu smiled and made a gesture for him to proceed. Thank you, team leader Abu. The bastard 059 bowed and thanked him, before excitedly rubbing his hands and walking towards the pretty, short-haired woman in the level D area. Don't stand there dumbly. Just follow me to the top floor suite to eat and drink like a king. As he said this, 059 reached out and tried to touch the short-haired woman's face in a perverted way. What I didn't expect was that the short-haired woman actually turned her head to avoid 059's perverted hand with a look of disgust. Damn it. You have no idea what's good for you. Having lost face in front of everyone, 059's expression instantly changed, and without any pity, he raised his hand and slapped the short-haired woman hard in the face. After the slap, he turned to Abu with a fawning smile and asked, Team leader Abu, what should we do when we encounter someone who refuses to listen? I already told you, it's fine as long as they don't die or become permanently disabled. Of course, if you can't resolve it yourself, you can ask us for help. A Burmese bastard responded and immediately walked towards the short-haired woman menacingly, carrying a club. Chapter 24. Slapping each other. The victor wins a woman. Wait. The short-haired woman cried out in terror as she looked at the Burmese thug who was walking towards her with his club raised. You ungrateful bitch. I'm doing you a huge favor by letting you be with me for a week. Don't worry about giving me any face, big brother. Just teach her a good lesson. 059 yelled gleefully from the side. The way he strutted around, full of arrogance, made me want to rush up and slap him hard in the face again. What a piece of garbage. I cursed inwardly with disdain, already determined that if I ever found a good opportunity, I'd give that bastard a beating he wouldn't forget. We were already pitiful enough to be tricked into coming to Myanmar, and he had to appear, acting like that. Disgusting. Just as I was thinking about how I'd deal with that bastard when I got the chance, the short-haired woman suddenly, and without warning, turned everyone's attention to me. Isn't 086 several levels higher than me as well? I want to go with him. If I remember correctly, Level A operators also have the right to choose a woman, right? Now it was my turn to be dumbfounded. What the hell was going on? How did I suddenly get dragged into this? I didn't know if the short-haired woman really wanted to be with me, or if she was intentionally trying to shift the blame, trying to use me to deal with that bastard 059. Either way, I didn't want to get involved in this mess. My face instantly turned cold, and before Abu and 059 could speak, I quickly shouted, I don't need to choose a woman. I give up. No matter what the short-haired woman's purpose was, I could not get myself involved in such ridiculous business. I hadn't been brainwashed by those Burmese bastards. I wasn't focused solely on climbing the ranks, seeking pleasure, enslaving others, and indulging in the thrill of perverted power. My only thought was to find an opportunity to escape this hellish place alive. My parents and family back home in the Shu province must be worried sick. I didn't have the time or inclination to think about women at this critical moment. 086, rules are rules, and you can't just give up. Since 059 has taken a liking to this woman, and the woman has chosen to be with you, then the woman's ownership for the next week will depend on you and 059. The bastard Abu seemed like a child who had discovered a new toy and suddenly became very excited. I hate trouble the most. So, how about this? You two slap each other in the face one after the other, until one of you can't take it anymore and gives up or falls. The woman will be the prize for the winner. I'll be damned if I'm going to slap each other. Looking at the playful and perverted glint in the depths of the bastard Abu's eyes, the fist that I had hidden in my sleeve almost broke through my skin. The idiot 059 was still explaining to Abu, aggrievedly, that he was a level S ace operator, while I was only a level A operator, so he should have the right to choose first. The truth was that those Burmese bastards had never treated us like human beings. Indeed, Abu just rejected 059 with a casual remark. Now, even if 059 didn't want the short-haired woman, it was too late. I understood the bastard Abu's intention. He would never miss an opportunity to enslave, indoctrinate, and brainwash us. He wanted us, as a group, to gradually get used to this rule from the bottom of our hearts, to get used to his enslavement and rule. Now that things had come to this point, there was no point in saying anything. I tried my best to control my emotions. After taking a look at the short-haired woman with a blank expression, I took the lead and walked out of the crowd. 059 had been kicked by me and then slapped hard twice, so he was clearly a little afraid and wary of me. He only slowly and reluctantly approached under the urging of Abu. Since 059's operator rank is higher, you will go first. The bastard Abu leisurely lit a cigarette, casually dragged over a chair, sat down, crossed his legs, and added that last sentence. The other Burmese bastards were also laughing, some standing, others squatting, huddling in groups, smoking, and pointing fingers at us. There were even more Burmese bastards, who were not afraid of the spectacle, placing bets on me and 059. In their eyes, I and 059 were more like animals in a circus, jumping through hoops of fire. Even worse than animals. Go ahead and hit. What are you waiting for? 059, you must beat that piglet in front of you. I've bet 2 packs of cigarettes on you. If you lose, I'll kill you. 086, beat that little runt to death. Amid the cursing and laughter of a group of Burmese thugs, this perverted slap fight began. 059 was either really timid or pretending to be. When he heard one of the Burmese bastards say that he had placed a large bet on him, and that if he lost, he would kill him, the bastard became like a dog with its tail stepped on. He yelled and swung his arm, slapping me in the face. My first instinct was to dodge, but at the critical moment, I forced myself to endure it. Whether I was willing or not, whether I was active or passive, I had already been marked by Abu and those Burmese thugs. This was extremely detrimental to me. For the next period of time, unless it was absolutely necessary, I didn't want to do anything out of the ordinary. Since Abu and those Burmese bastards wanted a show, I could only grit my teeth and satisfy them. Because I had to make myself appear the same as everyone else, slowly adapting to the law of the jungle that was stipulated by Abu and the compound. With this mentality, I took 059's full-powered slap head-on. Even though I had gritted my teeth and tensed my facial muscles in advance, the slap still caused my body to stagger. I felt dizzy, and my head was buzzing, with a burning pain in my left cheek. After about half a minute, I shook my head and barely recovered. No, if I take a few more slaps, my face will probably be as swollen as a pig's head tomorrow. How am I supposed to make calls then? With that thought, I spat out the blood and saliva in my mouth and became ruthless. It's my turn, isn't it? 059 swallowed hard with a horrified expression and simply closed his eyes. Dodge? I would never give him that option. Since I had decided to be ruthless, I certainly wouldn't be lenient. First, I measured the distance between my palm and his face, and then, without being noticed, I spread my fingers, curled my thumb inwards, pressed it firmly against the tiger's mouth, and swung my arm, using all my strength to slap 059's face. As a university undergraduate, I had at least some basic medical knowledge. I was not slapping his cheek, but aiming directly at 059's temple. Snap! The powerful slap landed on his face with great force, numbing my own hand, especially my thumb, which felt a sharp, piercing pain. I don't know if it was my good luck or good aim, but after taking my slap, 059 didn't even have a chance to scream. His body tilted to one side, and he fell to the ground, knocked unconscious on the spot. Chapter 25. Good intentions backfire, forced to attract hatred. I won, but I wasn't happy at all. Using slaps to decide the ownership of a woman was in itself a distorted and perverted act. Whether I liked it or not, I was already within the animalistic laws deliberately set up by Abu and those Burmese bastards. That beautiful, plump, short-haired woman would be my personal property for the next week. As long as I didn't kill her or cripple her, I could do what I wanted with her during non-working hours. Abu said that I could bring her to live in the single room on the 3rd floor, or I could let her continue to live in the dungeon on the 1st floor. I could just summon her when I needed her. That's right. The bastard Abu used the word summon. It made it seem like I was the short-haired woman's master. As for when the need would arise, every man knew what that meant. From the eyes of the others who were also treated like pigs, I saw envy and jealousy. As for the short-haired woman, she was as obedient as a little female dog, consciously standing quietly behind me. It seemed that for her, being able to follow me for the next week was something she considered to be an honor. From beginning to end, I remained silent and allowed the bastard Abu to arrange things. I was already eye-catching enough and didn't want to cause any more trouble. Just when I thought that this ridiculous slap fight had ended after I secretly dealt a powerful blow to 059 and knocked him out, the bastard Abu actually asked me to choose 2 more people to be my slaves for the next week. My first instinct was to refuse, but I held back the words that were about to come out of my mouth. Putting aside the question of whether or not refusing would have worked, I would definitely become an outsider in the eyes of others, being labeled as disobedient in the hearts of those Burmese bastards. With no other choice, I randomly chose 2 of my colleagues who had been tricked into coming to Myanmar with me. One was a tall, burly man with a not-so-bright mind from the northeast, Zhao Paozi. His surname was Zhao, his nickname was Paozi, and I had long forgotten his real name. The other was named Hui, about 25 or 6 years old, and was usually honest and kind. These 2 were also the people I had a relatively good relationship with at the company. The reason I chose Zhao Paozi and Hui was because I was thinking of helping them as much as I could in the coming week. Of course, I had also considered bringing them with me when I eventually found an opportunity to escape. After all, you never knew what the future held, and if I had a couple of extra hands, perhaps the hope of escaping alive would be greater. But after I had chosen the 2 of them, Abu's next sentence almost made me curse. To ensure that they will be obedient for the coming week, first give them 10 slaps each as a way to set the rules. After saying that, the bastard Abu looked at the others and added, not only does 086 need to set rules for his slaves for the next week, but you also need to do the same. This was not about setting rules at all. It was clearly about making me the target of hatred. When setting rules, no one is allowed to hold back. Otherwise, I will let you know what rules are. Just as I was planning to go through the motions later, the bastard Abu's voice rang in my ear again. Damn it. This beast was truly treacherous. I secretly gritted my teeth, cursing all the female ancestors of the bastard Abu for 18 generations. My selection of Zhao Paozi and He Hui had clearly been done with good intentions. And now those good intentions might backfire and cause them to resent me. Paozi Hui, I'm sorry. That's not what I intended. Under the watchful eyes of Abu and the other Burmese thugs, I could only harden my scalp, walk up to Zhao Paozi and He Hui, and lower my voice to explain what had happened, in a voice that only the 3 of us could hear. Zhao Paozi just grinned, lowered his head, and offered his face. I knew that Zhao Paozi had truly understood what I meant. I was a little moved, and I returned a smile to him, before raising my hand and slapping him hard. When I was slapping Zhao Paozi, I tried to control the force in my hand, making each slap sound crisp and loud, while at the same time, trying not to actually hurt him. After slapping each side of his face 5 times, even though Zhao Paozi's skin was thick, his whole head looked like it had swelled. I'll find a chance to make it up to him later. I knew it was not convenient to say much now. After slapping Zhao Paozi, I walked towards He Hui. He Hui's face looked very ugly. He bit his teeth and lowered his head with his neck stiff, and was ready to get beaten. But he didn't look at me. It was clear that he was holding a bit of anger in his heart. But no matter what he was thinking, these 10 slaps could not be avoided. Even if I was willing to hold back, according to my understanding of the bastard Abu during this period, the end result would most likely be that neither He Hui nor I would be spared. After slapping He Hui 10 times, alternating from one cheek to the other, the bastard Abu finally shifted his attention away from me and to the others. This farce lasted until almost 7:30 before it finally came to an end. In addition to Zhao Paozi and He Hui, there were also a few other unlucky ones who received slaps. From the looks in these people's eyes, I could clearly feel anger and hatred. Not towards the Burmese thugs, but towards the ones who had hit them. I knew that, starting from today, the seeds of discord and hatred between us pigs were completely sown. If those temporary level B operators secretly dared to do something behind the scenes, I was afraid that those who were slapped by them today would tell the Burmese thugs right away. When it came to dinner that evening, the difference between the different levels of operators was immediately apparent. The lowest level D operators were given mantu and porridge and a small dish of pickled vegetables. The C-level operators, in addition to a large bowl of white rice, had a spoonful of green beans stir-fried with meat, but there were only 2 or 3 pieces of meat. The meals for the B-level operators were relatively better. In addition to white rice, there was a bowl of steamed pork with preserved vegetables. The portion was about the same as in a domestic restaurant, and there were at least 7 or 8 slices of pork. When I went to get my food and saw the meal that the Burmese thug chef was handing me, not only was I stunned, but the entire dining hall erupted with envious exclamations and the sound of people swallowing their saliva. A plate of braised pork ribs, a plate of scrambled eggs with tomatoes, 2 braised chicken drumsticks, a bowl of seaweed soup, a portion of rice, and a bright red apple. This was my dinner tonight. 3 dishes, a soup, not only a combination of meat and vegetables, but also a dessert of fruit. Even back in China, when I was eating alone, I had never enjoyed such a high standard of living in any single meal throughout the year. Not only that, but while I was staring with disbelief, a Burmese thug also gave me 2 packs of Yushi cigarettes and a bottle of white wine in front of everyone. Even though the bastard Abu had previously said that the living conditions of higher-level operators were very good, when I saw these things with my own eyes, I still felt like I was dreaming. As I carried my almost overloaded tray, the eyes of everyone were glowing green. I guess that if they had not feared the Burmese thugs with guns, they might have rushed over like rabid dogs. Chapter 26. To survive, we must band together for warmth. Tonight's meal was definitely the most stressful meal I've ever had in my life. Having dozens of eyes staring at me from all directions made me feel like I was sitting on pins and needles. Looking at the 3 dishes and soup in front of me, I even had the illusion that I was eating a Grand Manchu Han imperial feast. Not only were those guys who were eating mantu and drinking porridge staring, but Zhao Paozi and He Hui, who were sitting across from me, and the short-haired woman who shamelessly insisted on sitting next to me, were also staring at the food on my plate, swallowing hard. I frowned, pretended not to see the desire in their eyes, first put the 2 packs of cigarettes and the bottle of white wine in my pocket, and then picked up a chicken drumstick and began to eat it with big bites. I don't know if it was because I hadn't had a proper meal in too long, or if the Burmese thug chef's cooking skills were good, but the chicken leg was so delicious. I ate it clean in a few bites. After finishing a chicken drumstick, I picked up my chopsticks and threw a piece of braised pork ribs into my mouth. The ribs were cooked until very tender. The bones separated from the meat with just a chew. The feeling of eating the meat and spitting out the bone with ease was amazing. In a few bites, a large piece of braised pork ribs had gone into my stomach. Just as I was preparing to pick up a second rib, He Hui, who was sitting across from me, swallowed hard and finally couldn't help but speak up. Brother Chong, can I have a piece of rib? I've almost forgotten what meat tastes like. I couldn't finish the 4 dishes and soup, but I had been waiting for them to ask first. From the time I slapped He Hui 10 times in the office to just now, I had been thinking about a problem. No matter the reason, He Hui had been slapped by me for no reason, and he definitely held a grudge in his heart. I could tell that from his expression and the way he was looking at me at that time. Judging from the current situation, it would probably be difficult to find a chance to escape this hellish place anytime soon. It would be short 1 or 2 months, or long as a year and a half or even longer before I'd leave. The animalistic rules had only just begun, and there was already someone like 059 who, whether he was truly brainwashed or just pretending to be, had appeared. I estimated that after the next week's performance assessment, at least half of us pigs would go as crazy as 059. Even worse than that, relying solely on myself to survive under these perverted and twisted animalistic rules would not be easy. So, I was thinking about whether to find a few helpers and secretly form a small team. As time passed, the bestial nature hidden in everyone's hearts would be unleashed in the shortest amount of time through the insidious and subtle changes brought about by this environment. Fortunately, it had only just begun. Fortunately, I was the only one in this batch to be promoted to a temporary level A operator. If it were 1 or 2 weeks later, and I were just a level B operator living in a 3-person room, or a level C operator living in a 6-person room, if I were to be alone, I would probably not have my 2 packs of cigarettes and the bottle of wine until the next morning. I might even lose my life because of a pack of poor-quality cigarettes that only cost a few yuan back home. In this dark, desolate, and man-made hell, where one might have their kidneys harvested and blood drained tomorrow, most people would gradually develop a mentality of living for the day and to enjoy themselves while they can. To endure until the day I found a chance to escape this hellish place alive, I felt it was necessary to find a few helpers to band together for warmth. Compared to looking for people I didn't know, Zhao Paozi and He Hui would be more reliable. But one thing was for sure. This small group must be centered around me. Therefore, from the very beginning, I had to firmly grasp the initiative in my own hands. Tonight's meal was the best opportunity. Finally, someone couldn't help but ask to eat some meat, and I knew my chance had come. I just lifted my head to look at He Hui blankly, and casually threw the second piece of braised pork rib into my mouth. While they were so hungry their mouths were practically watering, I slowly and deliberately spat out a bone, pursed the grease from my fingers, and glanced at him, asking, "Are you not angry that I slapped you 10 times this afternoon?" "Brother Chong, what are you saying? This has nothing to do with you. It's all those Burmese bastards forcing you." "I know what you meant. You were actually thinking of taking care of me and Paozi for the next week." He Hui finally managed to move his gaze away from the braised pork ribs and the large chicken drumstick in front of me, and secretly glanced at the Burmese thugs with guns not far away, before lowering his voice to explain. Although He Hui's words were sincere, I could only believe half of what he said. If I didn't have this plate of braised pork ribs and a large chicken drumstick, and didn't have 2 packs of cigarettes and a bottle of wine in my pocket, he probably wouldn't even look at me. He would probably even be secretly plotting to find a way to repay those 10 slaps from this afternoon. Of course, there was no way that I would say these thoughts out loud. The human heart was unpredictable, even more so in this hellish place. "Paozi Hui, I really didn't expect those Burmese bastards to ask us to slap each other this afternoon. You saw the situation. I was also forced to do it. We all know what kind of life we've been living during this time. If you want to live in this hellish place, you need help. Do you understand what I mean?" I glanced at the Burmese thugs with guns who were constantly patrolling, and while pretending to eat, I spoke softly. "I'm a simpleton, and not very smart, but I can tell that you're different from those guys whose eyes have already started turning green. As long as you give me meat to eat, and take me with you when you find an opportunity to escape, I'll listen to you." Before He Hui could speak, Zhao Paozi had spoken up first. I couldn't help but look at him with surprise. I didn't expect this guy, who looked tall and dim-witted and even had the nickname Paozi, to be not stupid at all. That's right, if he were really an idiot, he wouldn't be sitting here now. After thinking about it for a moment, I immediately realized it. Being able to successfully complete a scam within one day, no matter how big or small, how difficult it was, I knew more clearly than anyone else. Since Zhao Paozi was able to successfully promote himself to become an official operator, even if he was the lowest level D operator, that was enough to explain things. It's better to have a brain. At least it will help one to survive for a longer period of time. Don't worry, if that day really comes, I will not forget you. I picked up the largest piece of braised pork ribs and placed it in his bowl with great sincerity. Zhao Paozi just smiled at me, didn't say anything more, and picked up the ribs with his hands and started to eat. He Hui, on the other hand, hesitated for a moment before asking me a very pointed question. "If we fail to complete the minimum standard of 50,000 yuan in revenue next week, will you help us?" Chapter 27. Grab that woman. She's trying to escape. He Hui's question was very sharp. As soon as it came out of his mouth, even Zhao Paozi, who was gnawing on the ribs next to him, stopped what he was doing and looked at me with wide, unblinking eyes. 50,000 yuan per week was the minimum performance standard. We had all seen with our own eyes how miserable the consequences were for failing to reach that standard. Did we not remember that skinny young man who was sliced up and whose heart was finally pierced by a knife? I lowered my head and hesitated for a moment before finally saying with a serious face, "Provided that my own performance is guaranteed, I will definitely find a way to help you." These words came completely from my heart. Of course, the prerequisite was that they had to listen to me obediently. And they would have to be approved by those Burmese bastards as well. I still did not know if it was even possible to share my performance with others. But no matter what, if it was possible, and if it did not affect me, it was certainly not impossible for me to lend them a hand. Okay, I believe you. As long as Brother Chung truly cares about us, from now on, He Hui, am willing to listen to you. He Hui stared into my eyes for a few seconds, finally nodding emphatically as if he had made an important decision. Zhao Paozi next to him continued to gnaw on his bone without saying a word. In this hellish place, I can't make any promises to you, but what I can say for sure is that if I have meat, I'm willing to share it with everyone, and if there's an opportunity to escape alive, we'll fight for it together. When I said those words, I lowered my voice even more, ensuring that even those sitting at the next table could not hear them. Eat. After saying that, I picked up a rib and passed it to He Hui. His Adam's apple bobbed up and down, and after saying thanks, he immediately stuffed the rib into his mouth, looking like a starving ghost who had been reborn. I also want to eat meat. Seeing Zhao Paozi and He Hui eating meat, the short-haired woman, who had long since swallowed her saliva countless times, finally couldn't help herself. You still want to eat meat? Do you even know you almost killed me today? I sneered, gritting my teeth, and looked at her with a hidden, menacing look, warning her. Don't think I don't know what you're thinking. I won't hold it against you this time, because you're a woman. But next time, don't you dare blame me for being ruthless. Of course, I knew what this woman was thinking. In the afternoon, it was only because she thought that bastard 059 was a mad dog, who would bite anyone and was hard to deal with, that she might be tortured if she were to follow him. The reason she turned the blame towards me was to make us fight amongst ourselves. Of course, it could also be that I looked more normal than 059 and was also younger and more handsome. And because my hands were stained with blood, I already had a certain level of intimidation among this batch of pigs, and others would not provoke me easily. Following me, in her view, might mean a more comfortable life than following 059. After my few words had exposed her tricks, the short-haired woman fell silent. I ignored her and continued to eat by myself. The Burmese bastards only gave us 15 minutes for each meal. When the time was up, regardless of whether we were finished eating or not, we would be driven back to our cells. I only want to escape this devil's den alive. What am I doing wrong? The short-haired woman's shoulders shook as she forcefully suppressed her emotions and said through sobs. Hearing this, I subconsciously paused my eating, but I still didn't say anything, continuing to bury my head in my food. Who, amongst those who had been deceived into coming to this hellish place, did not want to escape alive? But how many of them would actually escape in the end? From the short-haired woman's point of view, she was really not wrong. But her words had caused me to suffer an unprovoked disaster, so from my point of view, she was very much in the wrong. In this hellish place, the evil in human nature was magnified infinitely, and everyone was selfish. My left cheek had been slapped hard by that bastard 059 this afternoon, and now it was swollen, and it hurt to eat. I was just an ordinary person. Why the hell should I return kindness for evil? If it weren't for the fear of attracting too much attention from those Burmese bastards, I would have driven this woman away long ago. How could I have let her sit here? As long as you give me meat to eat for the next week, and treat me as well as you treat them, and help me to complete my performance, I can grant you any request. The short-haired woman seemed to have mustered up great courage, emphasizing the words, grant you any request, very heavily. As a normal man who was not stupid, of course, I could hear what she meant. In this kind of place, other than an idiot like 059, do you think anyone here wants your body? I sneered disdainfully and felt even more disgusted with her. For a few pieces of ribs, she was willing to sell herself. This kind of person had already lost their basic bottom line. How could I trust her? Today, she could sell herself for a few ribs, and tomorrow she might sell me out for a bowl of steamed pork with preserved vegetables. Women, especially beautiful women, in this hellish place, they were synonymous with trouble. Under normal circumstances, I would never keep trouble around me. There was only one woman in this entire compound whom I could trust. That was Yu Xiao. Other than Yu Xiao, there was no way I would let any other woman stay by my side. Are you really that ruthless? Aren't you afraid that I'll go to Abu and report that you're plotting to escape? Seeing that I was still unmoved after she had brought out the things that she considered most valuable, the short-haired woman changed her tone and started to threaten me directly. My heart trembled, but I pretended to smile nonchalantly and looked at Zhao Paozi and He Hui. Who's plotting to escape? Are you plotting to escape, or you? He Hui and Zhao Paozi immediately shook their heads like rattles. Seeing this, I turned to the short-haired woman again and said with an even brighter smile, "Do you see that? There's no one here who wants to escape. We eat well here, we live well here, we have cigarettes, we have alcohol, and we're living very comfortably. Only an idiot would want to escape. My goal is to become a level S ace operator." Although I was smiling, my heart had already cursed all 18 generations of the short-haired woman's ancestors, and at the same time, I secretly broke out in a cold sweat. I was so focused on thinking about how to win over Zhao Paozi and He Hui that I had ignored the short-haired woman next to me. This woman had given me a reminder. I must never mention escape to anyone again. Although the vast majority of people had this thought in mind, thinking it and saying it out loud were two different things. This kind of thing could be either a big deal or a small deal. Whether it's true or not, if I report you, what do you think Abu and those Burmese people will think? The short-haired woman took a deep breath, stuck her neck out and met my gaze, refusing to give an inch. "You are really courting death." At that moment, I really had the urge to kill. Since this woman dared to threaten me, then she couldn't blame me for being ruthless. Then, before she could react, as if I had been stimulated by something, I suddenly stood up from my stool with a face full of horror, pointed at the short-haired woman, and shouted at the nearest Burmese thug, "Grab that woman! She's trying to escape." Chapter 28. Turns out the scam compound also has internal competition. Because of my yell, everyone in the dining hall looked over. The two nearest Burmese thugs immediately rushed over with their guns and violently pressed the short-haired woman to the ground. Everything happened too fast. From the time I suddenly yelled to the time the short-haired woman was pressed to the ground, it all happened in less than 10 seconds. It was not until the black muzzle of the gun was pressed against her forehead that the short-haired woman finally came to her senses. I didn't try to escape. It's him. He framed me. You have to believe me. I really didn't try to escape. The short-haired woman, who had been pressed to the ground, was instantly terrified. She didn't dare to struggle at all, and could only explain anxiously, loudly, "You guys, put your hands on your heads and kneel." A Burmese thug who looked like a junior boss also walked over. After hearing the short-haired woman's words, he frowned and aimed his gun at me, Zhao Paozi, and He Hui. I imperceptibly winked at the two of them, and we obediently put our hands on our heads and knelt on the spot as he had ordered. Zhao Paozi and He Hui didn't hesitate either, and knelt down at the same time with a thud. After being deceived into coming to this scam compound for more than 10 days, we had experienced everything that should be experienced and what shouldn't. We had all experienced punishments that were more extreme than kneeling countless times. What exactly happened? The Burmese thug junior boss looked at the short-haired woman who was being pressed to the ground, and then at me and Zhao Paozi, and his face was gloomy as if it was about to drip water. "Big brother, I really am innocent. How could I possibly escape? Even if you gave me 10 times the courage, I still wouldn't dare to escape." The short-haired woman looked at the Burmese thug junior boss with teary eyes and cried with a very aggrieved and miserable tone. If I was back in China and I saw a beautiful woman crying like this, I might even loosen my belt and give it to her. But this was Myanmar, a hellish place where people ate people. The thing is, in this situation, I certainly couldn't let the short-haired woman explain, so I immediately used the shortest words to recount the story I had made up in advance. That's how it is. This woman wanted to use her body to try to get me to take her out of here. How could I possibly agree to her request? You have to know that I only used one day to complete a performance of over 50,000 yuan, and I have already been promoted to a level A operator. Now I have 4 dishes and a soup for every meal. I have cigarettes, I have alcohol, I have a woman, and I also have 2 slaves that I can order around as I please. As long as I keep working hard, it won't be long before I can be promoted to a level S ace operator. When that happens, I can sleep with any woman I want, and I can kill anyone I want. Such a life can't be bought with any amount of money back home. I would have to have my brain kicked by a donkey to give up such a comfortable life, and take the risk of having my kidneys harvested, my blood drained, and my corpse made into fertilizer to escape. These words of mine were 9/10 true and 1/10 false, and my attitude was extremely sincere. Even from a certain point of view, I really did like that kind of level S ace operator life. Or perhaps in this world, there were really few people who could refuse such a life. The kind of power where all women are at my disposal and I could decide on the lives of others was something that money could not buy. Power was more attractive than money for men. To prove that what I had said was true, I even took out the 2 packs of cigarettes and the bottle of alcohol that only a level A operator was qualified to receive. Then I heard the Burmese thug junior boss mutter something in Burmese to the 2 people next to him, as if they were asking and confirming something. "You worthless bitch, how dare you think of escaping?" After speaking with the others for a few moments, the Burmese thug junior boss suddenly squatted down and grabbed the short-haired woman's hair, hitting her head hard on the ground while cursing at her. After only a few hits, the short-haired woman was covered in blood, and she screamed miserably. Seeing the Burmese thug junior boss hitting the short-haired woman, the stone that was hanging in my heart finally fell back into my stomach. Just keep doing a good job. As long as you complete your performance well, Team Leader Abu and I will not mistreat you. Get up. After holding the short-haired woman's head and banging it hard on the ground several times, this Burmese thug junior boss smiled and personally helped me up. The attitude of this thug was so friendly, which was really a bit beyond my expectations. I immediately put on a flattered look and said thank you several times before getting up from the ground. Let me introduce myself. I am Wu Mindang, the deputy team leader of the 9th group in the compound's telephone and internet information business department. What I did not expect was that this deputy team leader, who called himself Wu Mindang, actually handed me a cigarette and even took the opportunity to light it for me. After taking a strong drag from the cigarette, I felt a bit confused. For a moment, I didn't really understand what this thug was trying to do. After this period of understanding the compound, I roughly knew some things. For example, the scam group 9 that Abu was in charge of, with this batch of new pigs who had just entered the compound, had a total of about 200 people. In addition to that bastard Abu, the entire group 9 also had 4 deputy team leaders, and each deputy team leader controlled 50 people. A Burmese thug next to me, seeing that I didn't understand what Wu Minding meant, immediately chimed in, "You little rascal, you. Don't even know what kind of luck you've got. You actually had the honor of smoking deputy team leader Wu Minding's cigarette. Do you know that, in Myanmar, only people with honorable status have surnames, and the surname Wu is one of the 10 largest surnames in Myanmar. Even team leader Abu doesn't have a surname. Was there such a saying?" Now I was really a bit surprised, and I had not expected the ordinary-looking little dwarf deputy team leader in front of me to have this kind of status. In a remote small country where even birds don't shit, he was going on about noble surnames. It was really hilarious. Although I was thinking this in my heart, on the surface I was putting on a look of amazement, and the flattering words that even disgusted me came out of my mouth without effort. "Oh my, Deputy Team Leader Wu, I'm truly sorry. It's all my fault for being blind and not recognizing a true god when I saw one. No wonder you have such a strong aura the moment you stepped in, Team Leader Wu. Flattery always works, as the old saying goes." Wu Minding was clearly very pleased with my flattery, and the smile on his face became even more pronounced. I didn't know if it was an illusion, but I could actually see a hint of appreciation in this thug's eyes. "You're very good. You completed a performance of over 50,000 yuan in one day. Today was just the assessment. Tomorrow is when you will officially be assigned to groups. Come to the 4th group that I'm in charge of. As long as you complete your performance well, I guarantee you'll live more comfortably in this compound than you can possibly imagine." Only then did I suddenly realize the truth. It turned out that the reason he had said all this was to make me join his group. Did the various groups in the scam compound also have internal competition? I didn't dare to agree immediately, and after thinking carefully for a moment, I said, "Deputy Team Leader Wu, it's my honor to have your appreciation. I'm very willing to join your group. It's just that with Team Leader Abu over there, I had not only personally witnessed the methods of the bastard Abu, but also experienced them myself. If joining Wu Minding's 4th group meant that I would offend Abu, then I definitely wouldn't do such a stupid thing. At the end of the day, Wu Minding was just a deputy team leader. That bastard Abu was the real person in charge of the scam group 9. Chapter 29. Scared Shitless, Personal Slaves. Team leader Abu is in charge of all the matters in Group 9 and would not interfere with the specific details of which group an operator is assigned to. You don't need to worry. Wu Minding seemed to have seen the concern in my heart and immediately explained with a smile. Compared to that bastard Abu, Wu Minding, whether intentionally or because he really came from a wealthy family in Myanmar, gave people a very cultivated and refined impression. Of course, I was very clear that whether it was the seemingly harmless appearance of Abu or the refined manner of Wu Minding, they were all just a facade. Deep inside, they were both harboring a brutal and inhumane beast. Just like when Wu Minding had grabbed the short-haired woman by her hair and banged her head hard on the ground. He was so vicious towards a beautiful woman. not to mention how brutal he would be with others. Despite how friendly and polite he was being with me right now, if I really went to the fourth group that he was in charge of and failed to produce an impressive performance, I was afraid that my fate would be no better than any of the others. It's a great honor for me that Deputy Team Leader Wu thinks so highly of me. From now on, I asked that Deputy Team Leader Wu please take care of me. My mind had changed, and I had made a decision. Since joining Wu Minding's fourth group would not offend that bastard Abu, then it didn't matter which group I went to. It was not a wise choice to publicly reject a vain thug like Wu Minding. Ha 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 ha, as long as you complete your performance well, I will definitely not mistreat you. Wu Minding happily patted me on the shoulder and casually gave me an empty promise. And I continued to act as if I was flattered, thanking this Burmese thug profusely. As I was bowing to see him off, Wu Minding, with his right hand in his pocket, turned and left. Just as I was secretly letting out a sigh of relief, preparing to sit down and continue my meal, Wu Minding, who was about to leave the dining hall, actually turned back. Oh right, since this woman was your reward for being promoted to a level A operator, then it's up to you to decide her fate. After saying that, without waiting for me to express my opinion, Wu Minding waved his hand and left the dining hall. On the other hand, the two Burmese thugs who had rushed up to press the short-haired woman down just now explained with a smile. The compound will usually either break both of the legs of any pig who tries to escape and throw them into the water prison, or they'll just directly harvest their kidneys, drain their blood, and make them into fertilizer. Since Deputy Team Leader Wu has given you the right to decide, then according to tradition, she is your personal slave from today onwards. Her life or death is all up to you. If you want her to die, I can shoot her in the head right now with just one word from you. Having said that, this Burmese thug showed a smile that all men understood, revealing his yellowed teeth as he continued. If you want to keep her for your own pleasure, you can also do what you want with her until you're bored, and then kill her. The prerequisite is that you must maintain at least a level A operator status, or an even higher level from now on. Hearing this, my eyes lit up. I didn't expect that there would be such an unwritten rule in the compound. Thank you, big brother, for telling me these things. May I ask how I can address you? I immediately took out a pack of cigarettes from my pocket and, with a smiling face, offered it to him as I was trying to build a rapport with him. My name is a Zhuang. The Burmese thug who had introduced himself as a Zhuang glanced at the Yushi cigarettes that I had given him and smiled contentedly, putting it into his pocket. After observing secretly for this period of time, I discovered that this compound was hidden deep in the mountains and that supplies were only transported in once a week. I didn't know how high the salaries were for those Burmese thugs who were at the lowest level, like a Zhuang, but the supply of cigarettes and alcohol seemed to be very tight on a normal day. Otherwise, during the slapping match between me and that bastard 059 this afternoon, there wouldn't have been Burmese thugs who were there to watch and bet with cigarettes. Moreover, according to my observation, the Burmese thugs at the lower level mostly smoked Red Pagoda Mountain cigarettes that sold for 7.5 yuan back home. The junior bosses mostly smoked Yushi and soft Union cigarettes. The deputy team leaders like Wu Minding smoked Chinese cigarettes. From this, it was clear that the entire compound had, perhaps long ago, deliberately created a strict system of hierarchy. It wasn't just the pigs that were deceived into coming to the compound, but the Burmese thugs who worked for the compound were the same. From small things such as cigarettes, alcohol, and meals, to large things such as power, there were strict and clear distinctions between the different ranks. After figuring this out, I was even a little impressed by the mysterious person behind all this. It was easy to imagine that after the hierarchy was deeply ingrained, the person behind the compound would certainly be at the very top of this food chain. This thug, A Zhuang, had taken the cigarettes that I had given him as a bribe, and I immediately followed up, asking him, "Brother A Zhuang, if my operator status drops to level B or level C during a performance assessment, what then? Only level A and level S operators have independent rooms. If you don't even have your own independent room, how are you supposed to keep your own slave? If your rank falls below level A one day, you can definitely kill her in advance. If you can't bear to do it, then she will be awarded to other operators who have a good performance as a prize." The way that Zhuang was saying it was very calm, but the short-haired woman who was kneeling next to him was so scared that her hands and feet were freezing cold, and a pool of pungent yellow liquid appeared under her butt. Ha ha ha, this pig just peed her pants. Damn it, how could someone with so little courage even think of escaping? Isn't that just courting death? A Zhuang and the Burmese thug next to him smelled the urine, and immediately pointed at the short-haired woman and burst into laughter. Taking this opportunity, I chatted with a zhuang about some things that I didn't usually get to hear. Then, they left with their guns, chatting and laughing, leaving the short-haired woman behind. Of course, it was my request that they leave the short-haired woman behind, since she was now my personal property, and I had the right to execute her at any time. Then keeping her for the time being was definitely more valuable than killing her right away. Did you hear what they were saying just now? After the Burmese thugs had left, I looked at the short-haired woman who was kneeling in front of me and asked in a cold voice. I heard. The short-haired woman trembled, raised her head, roughly wiped away the blood that had half-dried on her face, and tried to force a docile and obedient smile. But her smile was more hideous than crying. So, do you want to live or die? If you want to die, I can personally send you on your way. As you know, killing people is not the first time I've done it. I curled up my lips with a sneer. My eyes were as cold as knives. I was deliberately putting on a perverted and vicious appearance. I slowly grasped the short-haired woman's neck and started to exert a little force. It wasn't until her face had turned red and she was instinctively hitting my arm that I let go. Cough, cough, cough. The short-haired woman coughed violently after being released, greedily taking in large breaths of air, like a fish that had been thrown onto the shore and was about to dry up and die. She coughed violently for almost half a minute before she finally recovered with a face full of horror. Chapter 30. To escape alive, I am willing to keep company with beasts and even temporarily become a beast. You're so smart. If you want to live, you should know what to do next. At this moment, I was trying my best to imitate the way those perverted killers in movies looked, and trying to cause mental and spiritual oppression to the short-haired woman who had almost caused me to be killed twice. I didn't know if I was just naturally a good actor, or if in the eyes of others, I was someone who had cut flesh, killed people, slapped. The bastard 059 unconscious with one slap, and now had control over life and death. I was already considered half a perverted beast. The short-haired woman almost peed herself again, and started frantically slapping herself over and over again, while constantly begging for mercy and apologizing. I was wrong. I won't dare do it again. As long as you, master, don't kill me, I will be your dog from now on. I'll do whatever you tell me to do, and I'll bite whoever you tell me to bite. Master, please, spare me. I promise to be obedient from now on. The short-haired woman was slapping herself and kowtowing, and repeating those same few sentences over and over, so much so that she was almost incoherent with fear. Seeing this, I felt a little sympathetic. After all, I wasn't a true beast. But when I thought of how she had shifted the blame to me this afternoon, and how she had threatened me with reporting that I was plotting to escape in the end, I forced myself to suppress the pity in my heart. After all, there were still so many people watching in the dining hall. If I wasn't ruthless with the short-haired woman today, other people might take every opportunity to climb on top of my head and start pissing and shitting on me. The most important thing was those Burmese bastards, who might have suspicions about me because of this. Anything that had the potential to become a stumbling block in my path to escaping this hellish place alive had to be kicked aside. To one day escape alive from this man-made hell, I was willing to do anything, even if it meant keeping company with beasts and even temporarily transforming myself into a beast. I had already thought everything through during this time. Only if those Burmese bastards treat me as one of their own would I be able to find a chance to escape this compound alive. Although Yu Xiao had once told me to try to find a way to be transferred under Li Fei's leadership, I knew that she was doing this for my own good, but at the moment I could not find any chance to leave the scamming business at all. And I firmly believe that walking with 2 legs was definitely faster and more stable than walking with only 1 leg. Alright, remember what you just said? If you let me discover even the slightest thing amiss, I guarantee that your fate will be 100 times more miserable than you can imagine. After the short-haired woman had slapped herself more than 20 times, until her face, which had been rather pretty, was swollen and looked like a pig, I pretended to be indifferent and told her to stop. From the eyes of the people around me, I could see fear, envy, disdain, and many other emotions. I knew that they were afraid of the way I had treated the short-haired woman, and that they were envious that I had so easily acquired a personal slave and a young woman whose face and body were not bad at all. I didn't care about what other people thought, as long as they didn't interfere with me and didn't come to provoke me. Just as the short-haired woman was climbing up from the ground, a Burmese thug who was in charge of maintaining order in the dining hall loudly announced that the mealtime was over. And so all of us were escorted back to our rooms. Zhao Paozi and He Hui were both the lowest level D operators, so they could only return to their cells on the first floor. As for me, I was directly escorted to the third floor with the short-haired woman. Your room is at 317. After returning to your room, you are not allowed to walk around without permission, and you are not allowed to go up or down the stairs. If you need to go out for anything, you must stand at the door and ask for permission beforehand. A Burmese thug who was in charge of maintaining order on the third floor gave us the instructions before letting me and the short-haired woman into the room. As I was going up the stairs, I had already secretly taken a look around. Compared to the dungeons on the first floor, the security on the third floor was obviously much looser. I only saw that there was someone on duty at both ends of the corridor and at the stairwell. As I was going upstairs, I even saw someone talking to a guard in the corridor and then going down the stairs by themselves. As for what they went downstairs to do, I had no idea. I guess that if nothing unexpected had happened, that person must have gone to find a woman. After entering the door, I realized that the room was a little bigger than I had expected, about 10 square meters. The room was a bit old, and the furniture only consisted of a bed, a table, and a chair. What made me really surprised was that the room also had a small 2 to 3 square meter private bathroom. I tested it, and hot water could actually be released from the shower head, and there was even a bar of soap that had been left in the bathroom in advance. I can finally live a life that is somewhat normal. After taking a quick look around the room, I actually felt like I had seen a ray of light in the darkness. During the past few days of sleeping in the dirty, smelly, damp basement cells, with mice and cockroaches scurrying everywhere, I felt like I was starting to become one of those cockroaches and mice myself. Although this room was not that much better than those single rooms in urban villages back home, costing 300 yuan a month, at least it was dozens of times better than those dungeons in the basement. But when I saw the short-haired woman, who looked both happy and afraid after entering the door, I couldn't help but feel a bit troubled. There was only a single bed in the entire room. Where should I put her? I casually pulled over that chair, and with my legs crossed, sat in front of the short-haired woman, while she was looking at me with fear. I opened the cigarette box, pulled out a cigarette, lit it with a match, took a large puff, and then finally started to speak with a cold face. What's your name? If nothing unexpected happened, she would be living with me for the next week. I felt that I had to ask her what her name was. From the bottom of my heart, I resented using numbers to address people, and I also didn't like it when other people addressed me with numbers, because that made me feel like I was an object, a pig in a pig pen. Wang Lingling. The short-haired woman looked like she was very afraid of me, as she stood carefully in front of me, with her head buried very low. Wang Lingling, I don't care whether you're really afraid or just pretending to be like this. What I want you to always remember is that you are my personal slave now. In essence, you are no different from this cigarette in my hand. If I let you live, then you can live. If I tell you to die, then you must die. From the 2 previous incidents, it could be seen that the woman in front of me, who claimed to be Wang Lingling, was definitely not as harmless as she appeared now. She might be really scared now, but that didn't mean that she didn't have any other thoughts. I hate trouble the most, and I don't like useless trash either. If you want to live, then you have to do at least one thing each day that I think is valuable, just like how Abu does performance assessments every week. Once I feel that you are useless, you know what the consequences will be. If there was a mirror in front of me right now, I estimated that even I myself would be scared by my eyes and expressions at this moment, because I could clearly feel that at this moment I was a cold-blooded, ruthless, and heartless pervert.